Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Matt Freeman,
And I'm Scott Daly.
and our gathering here today is 600 years in the making. I gotta say, I'm a little disappointed that more people didn't show up.
Well, Matt, our ancestors forgot about daylight savings time. That was
Oh,
daylight savings time.
damn it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We hope you are having a wonderful Friday night. It is technically July now, but this is our June book club. I'm sure we know a lot of you people in chat right now, but if you're in chat, please say hello. We want to talk with you guys. And if you are joining us for the very first time, welcome. We are Doof Media, and we make podcasts all about the stories we love. We also arrange and organize this here book club. Matt, what's a book club? Explain it.
Well, each month for the last 40 months,
47.
47 months, 47 moons. I'm trying to be all
Stop
epic
it.
and
Just
conspiratorial.
stop it.
Scott and I select 5 books from a pool of books submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll for all of our supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia, and we let them vote on which they'd like us to talk about. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it together.
And then we come here on the YouTubes on the last Friday of the month, or when Scott is out of town for the first time in a year and a half on the last Friday of the month. We do it on the Friday after the last Friday of the month, which is why we're here right now. We pull slides of interesting moments, and we just spend a couple hours talking about the book. This is a fully interactive discussion. That's why we're streaming it instead of just recording a podcast. So we want to talk to you guys. We want to hear from you guys, and we want to talk about this book. Speaking of the book, Matt, well, what book are we talking about today?
We're talking about Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco.
All right, what is that book about?
Uh,
It's a difficult question.
yeah, well, I can read the summary
All
for
right,
you, which
do it.
will go part of the way toward explaining that. Bored with their work and after reading too many manuscripts about occult conspiracy theories, 3 vanity publishers, employees, Belbo, Diotavelli, and Casaubon, invent their own conspiracy for fun. They call this satirical intellectual game The Plan, a hoax that connects the medieval Knights Templar with other occult groups from ancient to modern times. This produces a map indicating the geographical point from which all the powers of the earth can be controlled, a point located in Paris, France, at Foucault's Pendulum. But in a fateful turn, the joke becomes all too real. The 3 become increasingly obsessed with the plan and sometimes forget that it's just a game. Worse still, other conspiracy theorists learn about the plan and take it seriously. Belbo finds himself the target of a real society that believes he possesses the key to the lost treasure of the Knights Templar.
Dun dun dun.
That is actually pretty much a summary of the whole book.
It is a summary of the whole book. It is a summary that I think makes the book seem much more like propulsive and tense
Yeah,
than
actiony.
than the book actually is. So this is the part of the show where we give our overall thoughts on the novel. And as we do this, we would like to hear from you in the audience. What did you think of Foucault's Pendulum? Had you read it before the book club? And what did you think of it? And Matt, same question. What did you think of this book?
This is a very strange book.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very unusual experience. Out of all of the books we've done in the book club, this was the most difficult, I think. In the end, I'm glad that I exposed myself to it, but I can't say that I enjoyed much of it. I did enjoy some of it. I enjoyed. I think that the writing style is very fun. It's just that it just kind of is a lot. That's my first cut. What did you think, Scott?
Yeah, this was an interesting one for sure. I said this a little bit earlier in the week, but this is one of the books I think I've got the closest to not finishing prior to the book club. I managed to finish it last night, but I started over a week ago. Normally I wait till like the Monday before the book club to get into the book, and I can usually wrap it up before Thursday, no problem. Then I have like all day Thursday and Friday to think about it and put my notes together and get ready for the show. But This one was tough. It was tough. There's a lot of things going on in this book that I don't know. See, I really tried when I was pulling slides to really focus on the things about the story that I did enjoy. And so there's not too many slides about the rambling nature of the story and the incredibly dense exploration of history and different groups throughout the ages. Because I just I didn't want to read that out loud. And I don't want to talk about it too much because I almost think so much of that. Like, here's my opinion of this book. I think it's a very well written book that is doing some really interesting things, and I think it's almost kind of written to be boring. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think the only way the book works is if you go through these incredibly dense, really detailed. Like, I can't imagine how much work it took Eco to compile all this information about all these different groups, and make up parts that he wanted to. But like, it needs, in order for the idea of this whole thing to be ridiculous, in order for the ridiculous and absurdity of it to come out, it almost has to contain the detail, and that detail is just so fucking boring to read. Like, I finished this book and I enjoyed the things that it was going to say. I really liked, for the moment we get done with the backstory part and we're back in the periscope ready to see what the hell's going to happen at the Pendulum at midnight. Like, from that point on, I was fucking in on it, and because I was curious to see what was going to happen, and as the book is kind of revealing its themes and revealing the whole idea, I was loving it. But man, just like I think at like 300 pages in it is when they first start working on the plan, and it's just 200 pages of them working on the plan. And it's funny. Like, it's really funny and clever at times, but also in between those really funny, clever moments is 20 to 30 pages of, oh yes, and then this person did this specific thing, and then, like, it's just, but I do think, like, I do think that's the point, and that's where I'm really conflicted about it.
Yeah. I mean, it hits these bits of like extraordinary cleverness and wit that wouldn't be possible if it didn't have the parts that are more incredibly boring.
Exactly.
Like tied up with it. Like, it just, and so I think that's just a necessary part of it. I mean, I don't want to draw this connection too strongly, but somewhat reminds me of some of the way more like literary books we've read, like 100 Years of Solitude, where it's like you're mainly reading it for sort of the beauty of the prose and like the way it makes you feel.
Sure.
Because like that's a book that only sort of has a plot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could even say I think this book might have more of a plot than 100 Years of Solitude does.
Yeah, I think that'd be right.
So like it's the sort of book where it's not being written for plot propulsiveness. Certainly, it's the big joke is to compare it to the Dan Brown Da Vinci Code novel, because it's like the dark universe mirror of that book.
I heard it described as the smart man's Da Vinci Code, and I was like, no, it's the book that says the Da Vinci Code is stupid.
Yeah.
And made up, and everyone that believes in this stuff is dumb. That's like, it can't be. Yeah, it's a deconstruction of that idea. I think Eco said something to the effect of like, Dan Brown is my creation. I made him.
Dan Brown is one of my characters.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, that's like saying a Weird Al spoof of a song is the smart man's version of the song. Like, I don't know if that works. But anyway,
I think it works.
Tringard says, incredibly dense, rambling. They liked the ending, but there were vast amounts that seemed useless to the story, which I think we basically agreed with.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of foreign language in this book, like a lot of it. Mm-hmm. Some of them are real languages and some of them are just made up nonsense. And I read this on my Kindle, and there were moments in this book where I was like, oh, I'm so glad I can read this on my Kindle, because I can just highlight the French or the Italian, go to translate, and see the translation. And about 200 and something pages into the book, I just realized that actually wasn't necessary. And like, you just don't need to understand half of what the people are saying. Like, the fascinating thing about this book is there's so many references to historical events and people and literature, right? There's tons of literary references in this thing, more than I understood, for sure. And like at the beginning, my first 100 or so pages, I was literally highlighting everything, and because Kindle also has a thing where it'll bring up Wikipedia, right? So you see a name you don't recognize, tap it, and you can go see the Wikipedia article. And I was doing that for like everything, and I was like, what's this? I want to know more about this. What's this? And as I was doing that, I realized, oh, this doesn't actually matter. Like, it could just be blah 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 Templars, blah 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 Rosicrucians, blah blah blah. It doesn't, like, the actual truth of that history is not key to the theming of the book at all.
Yeah. It's almost just like a verbal onslaught, like tidal wave that's meant to just sort of overwhelm you, so you're not processing it consciously anymore, or like you're like so this is the level on which I enjoyed some of that. Is I would just become sort of swept away into the sort of mystical, like you begin to actually see, okay, I'm speaking to speak for myself, maybe you don't agree, but you sort of begin to see sometimes like why these diabolicals, as they call them, get sucked into this, because there's something very alluring about imagining that there's this conspiracy out there, and there's these ancient societies and these hidden rituals and these secrets, and you could be one of the people who could be in the know if you could be the one to put it all together. And there's something very alluring to that, and I think the book successfully at times sweeps you up into that headspace. At least it did for me.
Yeah, I actually don't know if I agree. At least for me, I wonder if that's like there were times when I think this is what the book is trying to do. The book is trying to kind of disarm you to the point where you start buying into some of the nonsense too. But there was always, to me, just this kind of tone of snark over it all that I could never truly get past this feeling that everything that is said in this book is being made fun of in certain ways. And I don't know if that's like me taking the snark from parts of the passages and then putting them on the other passages, but like even as our characters kind of got sucked into the bullshit they were creating, like it always seemed like from the narrator's perspective, it was like, this is stupid, and look at them, they're falling for it. Oh, these idiots. Like, so it never, like, I do think that maybe that was part of it, or that was part of the goal that Eco is trying to do here, is to make you feel that way. But for me, I don't think I ever got there. I think the closest I got there was like early in the book, when we learn the basic history of the Templar, like the he kind of goes through a crash course of the Templar from beginning of their existence to the end of their existence, and I thought that was really fun and interesting. But when we get into when we start like tying things together in crazy ways, like it just felt silly and stupid to me, to the point where I was like, this is dumb, and I don't see why anyone could actually ever believe this shit.
Well, Scott, should we address why you and I might have had different reading experiences?
I guess we should. So a funny thing happened to us.
So as usual, Scott reads the book and I do the audiobook. Partly due to preference, but at this point it's become like a meme that's just the way we do it.
Yeah.
So when I looked at Audible to find the audiobook, the first thing I saw was Foucault's Pendulum, read by Tim Curry. Oh my God, Tim Curry?
Fuck yeah.
This is going to be great. And so I downloaded it and I listened to it. I listened to like more than half of it, and we were like we were basically a few days out from the book club date.
Yeah. And
that was when me and Scott had a conversation where I was like, this is a pretty short book though. And Scott was like, it is not.
640 pages.
And the conclusion was that the Tim Curry audiobook version is severely abridged. So I consumed an extremely abridged version of this book unwittingly, and I didn't do it on purpose. I think what they cut out was actually a lot of the rambling, sort of discursive stuff that the book is actually famous for. So it's gonna be interesting. This discussion is gonna be interesting. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably, just based on hours, you had to have only gotten 25% of the book. Like a 600-page book should be like 20 hours, and yours was like 7.
It was like 6, 6 or 7, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know how this is going to work, but I do think it says something interesting about, like, if this conversation functionally works, what does that mean about
What
the
does that
book?
mean exactly? Yeah. Well, then let's just see, Scott. Let's see if this conversation is going to functionally work.
Okay, let's get into it, shall we?
All right.
Let's begin at the beginning.
All right. So at the beginning, we are prepared for what is to come. That was when I saw the pendulum. The sphere hanging from a long wire set into the ceiling of the choir swayed back and forth with isochronal majesty. I knew, but anyone could have sensed it in the magic of that serene breathing, that the period was governed by the square root of the length of the wire and by it, that number which, however irrational to sublunar minds, through a higher rationality, binds the circumference and diameter of all possible circles. The time it took the sphere to swing from end to end was determined by an arcane conspiracy between the most timeless of measures, the singularity of the point of suspension, the duality of the plane's dimensions, the triadic beginning of ear, the secret quadratic nature of the root, and the unnumbered perfection of the circle itself. I also knew that a magnetic device centered in the floor beneath issued its command to a cylinder hidden in the heart of the sphere, thus assuring continual motion. This device, far from interfering with the law of the pendulum, in fact permitted its manifestation, for in a vacuum any object hanging from a weightless and unstretchable wire, free of air resistance and friction, will oscillate for eternity. The copper sphere gave off pale, shifting glints as it was struck by the last rays of the sun that came through the great stained-glass windows. Were its tip to graze, as it had in the past, a layer of damp sand spread on the floor of the choir, each swing would make a light furrow, and the furrows, changing direction imperceptibly, would widen to form a breach, a groove with radial symmetry, like the outline of a mandala or a pentaculum, a star, a mystic rose. No, more a tale recorded on an expanse of desert, in tracks left by countless caravans of nomads, a story of slow millennial migrations, like those of the people of Atlantis when they left the continent of Mu and roamed stubbornly, compactly, from Tasmania to Greenland, from Capricorn to Cancer, from Prince Edward Island to the Svalbards. The tip retraced, narrated anew, in compressed time, what they had done between one ice age and another, and perhaps were doing still, those couriers of Masters. Perhaps the tip grazed Agartha, the center of the world, as it journeyed from Samoa to Novaya Zemlya, and I sensed that a single pattern united Avalon, beyond the north wind, to the southern desert where lies the Enigma of Ayers Rock.
You know, you gotta hand it to Mr. Eco. He doesn't like lull you in to what his book is gonna be.
Uh-huh.
This page is exactly what the experience of reading the book is. Like, it never changes from this. If you read this page and you're like, fuck that, don't finish the book, because it's just more of this. This is what it is. This is how he writes. This is how it comes off. It's this really fascinating kind of mix between this, like, it gets very technical with this kind of stuff. Like the second paragraph there is basically like a technical breakdown of, it doesn't go into the math itself, but it traces the math of how this thing works, and then it goes broad and mystical with what this means. It's just a lot. It's a lot to read.
Mystical and then like fan fiction history where it's like the Atlanteans in the pre-ice age. What the hell?
Yeah.
it's all just this sort of made up, highly elevated. It's what you expect to find in these books about ancient aliens and stuff, where it's like a mix of facts with extremely evocative fiction, basically.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of what exactly happens in the story is you take two facts, you take two things that are true, and then you draw a line between them, and people believe the line because the two facts are true. And that's kind of exactly what's happening here. Like, this is a perfect representation of, we start at the scientific, the most factual, the most verifiable, and as we go, we move towards more and more ridiculous. And this is just describing what a Foucault's pendulum is, which is just a device that proves that the earth turns. But this is also, like, I love that this is the device that Umberto Eco like picks to represent his book, because it's not that complicated of a device to prove something that we all kind of know. And there's still people out there that don't believe in it, right? There's still the flat earthers out there, the people that don't buy this kind of shit about the earth. And this is a very simple thing. And it's just like, it goes into what I think one of the main themes of the book ends up being, which is this idea that, like, if we have the answer to a question, it's boring. If the answer to a question is secret, then it must be the right answer, or else, like, or why would it be kept secret? And that ends up being one of the main things the book talks about. And so, like, does the Earth spin? Answer, yes. And then, of course, the big question is the why, right? And I think that's, like, I think one of the things that this book does most is not, it uses a bunch of whys as a way to answer how. And people are desperate not to just know the why, but also to know the how. And the how becomes, well, because of ancient organizations that all planned this whole thing, and it all makes sense. I'm telling you, it all makes sense.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
I mean, I think, like, I see why people love this book, though, because I could talk about this page for like 15 more minutes, right? But and the whole book is like this. Like I can't let it pass that what he says, the period is governed by the square root of the length of the wire, and by it, that number which, however irrational to sublunar minds, through the higher rationale. He's talking about pi.
Yes.
and it's like he's finding the most mellifluous, epic ways of talking about all of these things that are just like, we understand that. We do understand that. Like, but if you cast it in that way, it's like a Deepak Chopra sort of deepness associated with everything.
Yeah. I mean, you're right, because even that next sentence, the time it took the sphere to swing from end to end was determined by an arcane conspiracy between the most timeless of measures. Yeah. The singularity of the point of suspension, the duality of the plane's dimensions. It's just physics.
Yeah.
It's like, but he writes it in this, I love that, like this arcane conspiracy. Even just the basic elements of the laws of our world can be looked at from a perspective of how does it work that way?
Right. Magnets, how do they work? That's literally what this is, because there's a magnet in the floor.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, okay. Yes.
Let's move on.
It's a perfect beginning. Yes. Let's move on.
Let's move on to meet our protagonist and narrator. This is Casaubon. I don't actually know how to pronounce that name.
Well, Tim Curry says Casaubon, so.
But there's a U in there, Timothy Curry.
It's Tim Curry, man.
All right, Casaubon it is. So we meet this guy, and here's one of the first things we get to know about him. You live on the surface, Leah told me years later. You sometimes seem profound, but it's only because you piece a lot of surfaces together to create the impression of depth, solidity. That solidity would collapse if you tried to stand it up. Are you saying I'm superficial? No, she answered. What others call profundity is only a tesseract, a four-dimensional cube. You walk in one side and come out the other, and you're in their universe, which can't coexist with ours. Leah, now that they have walked into the cube and invaded our world, I don't know if I'll ever see you again. And it was all my fault. I made them believe there was a depth that they, in their weakness, desired. What did I really think 15 years ago? A non-believer, I felt guilty in the midst of all these believers, and since it seemed to me that they were in the right, I decided to believe, as you might decide to take an aspirin. It can't hurt, and you might get better. So there I was, in the midst of the revolution, or at least in the most stupendous imitation of it, seeking an honorable faith. It was honorable, for example, to take part in rallies and marches. I chanted fascist scum, your time has come, with everyone else. I never threw paving stones or ball bearings, out of fear that others might do unto me as I did unto them, but I experienced a kind of moral excitement escaping along narrow downtown streets when police charged. I would come home with the sense of having performed a duty. In the meetings, I remain untouched by the disagreements that divided the various groups. I always had the feeling that if you substituted the right phrase for another phrase, you could move from group to group. I amused myself by finding the right phrases. I modulated. So here's our main character, right? And he defines himself at the beginning as a person who has no belief system, no guiding principle, nothing. He's in the midst of a revolutionary upheaval in Milan, and has no opinion on it whatsoever, except that
Mhm.
the people he's around, because he's in academia, seem to be on the side of anti-fascism, and
Mhm.
pro-revolution, and um, he so he goes along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah, he I think there's a thread of commentary throughout this whole book about political activism, I suppose you could say.
Yeah,
And I'm actually not too sure about where the book is falling on all of it, because part of me wants to say that the connection is being made between like the more kind of obvious insanity of putting together these ancient conspiracies involving Rosicrucians and Knights Templar, and Freemasons with like the ways that we still like to associate ourselves with movements that have like a big kind of epic story
yeah,
associated with them. Like
yeah,
we're fighting fascism, which um, the that's sort of the nature of Casaubon's character, is that he's equally sort of like ironically detached from everything, and so it's like, yeah, but they really are fighting fascism.
yeah. I mean, like in
um,
this case, they are literally fighting fascism.
yeah, so it's like his ironic detachment it's it goes to the extent of being a character flaw, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
I
mean,
don't know. What do you think?
I don't want to say it's 1-to-1. I mean, I definitely think there is a line you can draw between the book's savage kind of uh, takedown of the people that so desperately want to belong to these hidden groups, and the people that belong to these movements. I think, but I don't know if the book wants us to make that connection 1-to-1 and say like it's the same problem, because I don't think it is. I think the people that exist on the periphery of it, like Casaubon and like the other diabolicals, like I think what it's saying is they don't care about any of that stuff, and
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that none of the students involved in this revolution and these protesting and the things that are going on, and the serious attempts in Italy to overthrow fascism at this time in history, are just part of some sort of innate human need to belong to some sort of group or organization. I don't think that's what the book wants to say. I do think it thinks that people like Casaubon float around these groups, and like the diabolicals will hover around these kind of things and use it to find answers to questions they don't even fully understand themselves. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think his conclusion is no, these kind of things are stupid. No.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's something more like, yes, everyone wants to believe they're part of something important, but then
Mm-hmm.
there's this subclass of people for whom like basic worldly importance is not adequate. They need it to be like cosmic, ancient, secret, personal importance, where they're like the best and the most important because they're the heirs of an ancient secret. And those are the people who get sucked down the rabbit hole of just kind of endlessly digging for the true deep secret, and never really finding it, because whatever they find is never enough, because if it was findable, then it's not the ultimate cosmic secret.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, so you
Cool.
want to move on?
Let's do
That's
so. All
Casaubon.
right,
Let's
so here we
read.
have one of the many parts of the book where we cut to Belbo's writings inside his computer. And in this bit, we understand his feelings on women, which end up defining him as a character pretty heavily.
Yeah, let's talk about Bilbo, which is what I called him in my head every
Of
time
course.
I saw his name.
Me too.
But it's audiobook.
I'm in love with the way Tim Curry would say Belbo. So anyway, on the other hand, there's the story of Cecilia, and Cecilia is here on Earth. I used to think about her before falling asleep. I would be climbing the hill on my way to the farm for milk, and when the partisans started shooting at the roadblock from the hill opposite, I pictured myself rushing to her rescue, saving her from the horde of fascist brigands who chased her, brandishing their weapons. Blonder than Marilena, more disturbing than the maiden in the sarcophagus, more pure and demure than the virgin, Cecilia alive and accessible. I could have talked to her so easily, for I was sure she could love one of my species. And in fact she did. His name was Papi. He had wispy blonde hair and a tiny skull, was a year older than I, and had a saxophone. I didn't even have a trumpet. I never saw the two of them together, but all the kids at Sunday school laughed, poked one another in the ribs, and whispered, giggling, that the pair made love. They were probably lying, like little peasants, horny as goats, but they were probably right that she, Marilena Cecilia, bride and queen, was accessible, so accessible that someone had already gained access to her. In any case, the fourth case, I was out in the cold. Could a story like this be made into a novel? Perhaps I should write instead about the women I avoid because I can have them, or could have had them. Same story. If you can't even decide what the story is, better stick to editing books on philosophy.
All right, so here's Bilbo, who Tringard in chat says they also, in their head, heard Bilbo. So I'm not alone on this one.
Naturally.
I think this is one of the most complex and interesting characters I've read about in a while. I really loved him, and the parts of my book that are the book that are my favorite parts all revolve around Bilbo and not Casaubon at all.
Okay. I'll just say that I feel like a lot of Belbo stuff must have been cut out if that's the case, because we did not spend a lot of time reading Belbo's files in the Tim Curry version.
You did not. Okay.
So maybe you can just tell me why you think Belbo is such a great character.
That infuriates me because he's the core of the novel. So Belbo is this guy who I pulled the other slide, so we're going to read it in a minute. But as a child, he failed to get the woman he loved, and he failed to, in his mind, have courage in a moment that he felt like he should have had courage. Mm-hmm. And these two events and similar events that we'll get into have dictated his entire life, have dictated everything he tries to do, everything he's chasing after, everything he wants out of life is coming from this look of his youth as this failure, as this complete lack of stepping up and embracing the moment. And it's why he has this fucked up relationship with Lorenza, because he is a guy who thinks he's not good enough for anything. There's this recurring beat throughout the story that he wants to write. He clearly, throughout the book, he has like pages and pages and pages of writing that our main character reads in his computer, but he sticks to editing because he doesn't think he's good enough to be a writer. He doesn't think he's good enough for Lorenza. He doesn't think he's good enough for women, so he only chases after the women he knows he can't have. The woman that, like, Lorenza is just fucking with him, like, the entire book. She's just fucking with him. And it's this really sad story of this guy who just can't get over what happened to him when he was young. And it's nothing like super traumatic. It's just like these moments of regret. Like, he's constantly looking backwards. Mm-hmm. And in much the ways, the rest of the Diabolicals are searching for a plan, a reason, a why. He is too. He's searching for meaning. He's searching for a moment, an opportunity to prove his bravery, to prove his worth. And it's all comes down to this definition. Like, Cecilia, in this case, in this passage here, is a woman that he had a huge crush on. He tells another story about her later in the book. This is a girl that he had a huge crush on, and he tried to do this thing where he learned how to play trumpet. He joined the band because the band, like, she always sat at the front of the band, but he played one of the big drums, so he was in the back. So he was like, I'll play the trumpet, and I got these other guys to play the drum. And then they were terrible at it, so the band director asked him to go back and teach them, and he, of course, did it. And the one time he did play the trumpet, she wasn't there, and so it's just this, like, it's these events that even as a kid he didn't even fully understand, just the randomness of life, and he wants to make up for it. He wants there to be meaning, and it just destroys him. And I mean, I think at the end he has a triumphant ending, or at least the book paints it through our narrator's gaze as a triumphant ending, but it's a very sad story.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I thanks for laying all that out. That was very beautifully put. I think I understood basically the plot of what you described, but not necessarily. I don't think we got much of Belbo's writing. We just kind of knew all those facts kind of separately from the writing.
I will say there are times in the writing when he goes on to write fiction, where he's writing fiction, like, basically he makes a character that I think is the Agile, however you pronounce his name, character, and makes fiction surrounding the plan. And I don't know if Eco was intentionally, like, there were times when I was like, this is really boring, and is Eco trying to make it seem like Belbo's not that good of a writer? But I mean, the thing about the time it takes to go through all his files is it shows you how much he had written, and the sheer amount of it goes to show you how much of being a writer is core to his identity, but he's stuffed that away. Like, he's just hidden it from the world because he feels ashamed by it. Like he feels he doesn't feel like it's good enough, and so all he does is edit other people's writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a genius idea for a character. I definitely agree with that. Mm-hmm. I think he ended up seeming more like sort of a clown, just because like the dominant thing that kind of comes to mind about his character would be his obsession with Lorenza,
mm-hmm.
which is sort of makes him look pathetic.
It does. But I do think the writing and the jumps back to his past really help flesh out the root of that, of the terrible shit that defines why he's so insistent on chasing after this woman who clearly does not want anything to do with him, or rather wants exactly as much to do with him as will get her way.
Yeah, I mean, what he wants from her is to be treated like crap, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's their deal.
Yeah, well, that's I mean that's what he feels like that is what is deserved.
Yeah. He doesn't he's chasing after a woman he knows will never actually settle on him, and that's his character. I like that. It's a great concept for a character. Just wasn't exactly in the pages of the book that I.
Yeah, well, I mean, what it does for me is we have these diabolicals who I think from the book basically just bashes on these people as idiots, as morons, as insane people that at the end of the book murder someone because they're told that there's a secret map to some bullshit that they don't even believe. I think one of my favorite parts of the book is when, like, what's his name gets to the front of the group and says, "We all found out yesterday that we are actually part of a secret society."
Yeah.
It was like, we've always known we were part of this, but we just found it out yesterday. We've been part of it for thousands of years. And it's just like, it's just nonsense. So the book takes these pretty heavy swipes at these people. But I think Belbo, to me, serves as a way to humanize that kind of person. He's obviously not the same as the rest of them, but it's a way for the author to explore why a person would get to the point where they would be willing to do that, where they would be willing to accept the absurd and understand and hear the story and this links and these plans and immediately embrace it. Like, there are people that have experiences like he did and like live with regrets, live constantly looking back and thinking back towards their youth and the mistakes they made or the opportunities they didn't take or the moments they didn't capture and hold on to. And I don't know, there's something really tragic about it and something beautiful, therefore, about the end, which we'll get to, in the way Belbo realizes that.
There's certainly something relatable just about the idea of sort of being overshadowed by the chances you didn't take,
sure,
the roads you didn't travel, and so forth. So that's good. It's funny. I'm going to kind of contradict myself because I just said there wasn't a whole lot of Belbo in the book, but I actually feel like Belbo was a better, more fleshed out character in my mind than Casaubon was, even though Casaubon is the POV. I mean, we're going to spend some time talking about Casaubon, obviously, but like, I don't understand Casaubon as well as I understand Belbo.
He's just so inactive in a lot of the book. He's reactive.
Yeah, he's just kind of blown around by what the other characters are doing.
Yeah, I mean, even like he heads to Brazil, but he heads to Brazil chasing a woman, and he kind of just wanders back to Milan, and he it's definitely the other characters dictating what he does. And it's not that he never makes choices or decisions, he certainly does, but like, it's definitely not his story. He's a part of the story, but it's not his story.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's move on to the first time where our triumvirate of characters meets, and this is one of the parts that I I love of the book is the cleverness of the dialogue here. So, well, Dio Levi, jeez, I'm Italian.
Levi.
I should know this. I'm Italian. Dio Levi and I are planning a reform in higher education, a school of comparative irrelevance, where useless or impossible courses are given. The school's aim is to turn out scholars capable of endlessly increasing the number of unnecessary subjects. And how many departments are there? 4 so far, but that may be enough for the whole syllabus. The Chetropolectomy department has a preparatory function. Its purpose is to inculcate a sense of irrelevance. Another important department is Idinata, or impossibilia, like urban planning for gypsies. The essence of discipline is in its comprehension of the underlying reasons for a thing's absurdity. We have courses in Morse syntax, the history of Antarctic agriculture, the history of Easter Island painting, contemporary Sumerian literature, Montessori grading, Assyrio-Babylonian phility, the technology of the wheel in pre-Columbian empires, and phonetics of silent film. How about crowd psychology in the Sahara? Wonderful, Belbo said. Dio Levi nodded. You should join us. The kid's got talent, eh, Jacopo? Yes, I saw it right away. Last night he constructed some moronic arguments with great skill. But let's continue. What do we put in the oxymoronics department? I can't find my notes. Dio Levi took a slip of paper from his pocket and regarded me with friendly condescension. In oxymoronics, as the name implies, what matters is self-contradiction. That's why I think it's the place for urban planning for gypsies. No, Belbo said. Only if it were nomadic urban planning. I didn't... What is that word? I don't even know that word.
I don't know.
Idinata concern empirical impossibilities. Oxymoronics deal with contradictions in terms. Maybe, but what courses do we put under oxymoronics? Oh yes, here we are. Tradition in revolution. Democratic oligarchy. Parmenidean dynamics. Heraclitean statics. Spartan sybaritics. Tautological dialects. Boolean heuristic. I couldn't resist throwing in, how about grammar of solecisms? Excellent, they both said, making a note. One problem, I said. What? If the public gets wind of this, people will show up with manuscripts. So, I mean, it was difficult to read, but this is delightful, right? It's witticism, it's wordplay, and there's a lot of this book is just these characters playing off each other in incredibly witty ways, and I find it delightful. It's just too far and few between, I think.
Yeah.
Few and far between.
This is definitely, Eco is smarter than you.
Yes.
And he's just showing off how much thought he's put into all of this, and just the fun of the idea, and I think it makes the characters more fleshed out. Like this is some of my favorite stuff because it really gives you a chance to understand the differences in character between these people, because they all sort of have their own lens and their own personalities, and it makes you like them. And
and
as an academic, I actually really appreciated the just constant stabs at academia and so forth.
Tetrapyloctomy is the art of splitting hairs 4 ways. It's just so fucking clever.
Oh my god. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like within the book, you have these characters who are just sort of trying to outsmart each other with their fanciful connections, which then turns into them sort of trying to entertain each other with their fanciful connections between historical events, which is how the plan comes about.
As an FYI, an ID nada is a figure of speech in the form of hyperbole taken to such extreme lengths as to insinuate a complete impossibility. So I will sooner have a beard grow in the palm of my hand than he shall get one on his cheek. So like extreme hyperbole.
Damn, Scott. Didn't have to go after me like that. All right.
You have a mustache right now. What are you talking about?
No, but my cheeks, though. Anyway.
Are they cold? Are they cold?
My 4 bare cheeks. All right.
I mean, that's fun stuff, right? I don't know if I pulled too many slides on Dio Levi, but he's the most fascinating of the 3, I think, in how different he is from the other 2. Like he plays the game, but it's almost for different reasons.
He's by far the one that I have the least understanding of, actually.
Certainly,
He's almost just like a tertiary character.
Yeah. He figures it out before the rest of them do.
Uh-huh.
Maybe because he gets cancer and decides. It's so funny because, like, the central idea of the plan is like, even if you make shit up if somebody believes it, it becomes real, right? And so his interpretation of this is like, we were doing all these things and we were putting all this thing into the universe, and it was real, and it was hateful, and it was mean, and it was harming people, or had the potential to harm people. And his interpretation is, that's why I got cancer, because that hate and that harm turned around on me and infected my body, which is it's also kind of its own plan to counter the plan, right? It's an understanding of, you know, you get cancer, one of the first things you ask is why did this happen to me, right? And that even is its own sort of diabolical planning of creating a grand conspiratorial reason for why this is happening to you. It's a consequence. We need to understand events as a series of cause and effect, right? That's so much of the underlying message of this book is central to that. Like, things have to go in some sort of chronological succession. If something happens, then something else happens. This leads to something else happens. So if right now in my life I'm unhappy, there must be a reason for it. 600 years ago, for some stupid Templar that wanted to kiss each other on the butt. That's got to be the reason.
Yeah. I kind of want to dig at this a bit, because I agree that there's like this need in his character in particular, I think in all of the Diabolicals to a degree, to like feel like they're attached to and associated with this grand spiritual truth, this religious reality, which I get confused about, honestly, when, like, because we're reading something and it'll be like, the idea here is that Christ actually survived and was smuggled away and actually became the forefather of the French aristocracy or something.
Yeah, it's the Da Vinci Code. They basically the computer invents the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah. So, but then, so actually, the Da Vinci Code is a perfect example, because the Da Vinci Code is a story that manages to suck any sense of the magic out of the historical tale of Jesus and just turns it into a soap opera about people who lived 2,000 years ago, because it's just a story about what happened, and there's no longer even any magic to it. And so I don't know, like I find the sort of contradiction interesting, because it's like these characters are trying to, they're in the act of trying to touch this like spiritual grandeur, they pull it down to earth actually, and make it sordid, make it commonplace, and maybe that's what Giottovelli thinks his sin is. I'm not sure exactly, but it is funny that like even in the act of getting cancer, he has to try to make it into some kind of grand, cosmic, meaningful occurrence.
Yeah, I mean, what he says is this general Kabbalic understanding that like the word of God is everything, and everything is the word of God, and therefore like anything you're writing, anything you're doing is taking the words and the letters of God and twisting them and turning them to try to find new meaning, and you're distorting God. I mean, this is really interesting, because one of the things at the end of the book that I think Casaubon says is something to the idea of like, religion comes with you with the answers to questions, right? Like, religion comes to you and says, if you have a question, what happens after I die? Religion has that answer for you, but I think the Diabolicals don't want to accept that answer, don't have that answer. I mean, and it's interesting because I don't think Umberto Eco is religious. I think he's an atheist, I'm pretty sure. And so he almost, but there's almost moments in this book where he argues, okay, like a lot of the result of this need for some sort of specific meaning comes from our kind of innate desire to have some sort of above us understanding, beyond us, greater than us, that a lot of people turn to faith and religion for. But a lot of the Diabolicals seem to be people that a lot of them are religious, but some of them have kind of just like abandoned the traditional religions to look for some other source of meaning. So it's like, I wonder if like you're trying to trying to look at, like, in a world in which people are becoming more increasingly less religious, increasingly more atheistic, more agnostic, like how they're supplanting this idea of a greater plan, of God's plan, towards a conspiracy theory, towards a more mundane and yet almost equally unbelievable, complex cause and effect chain of events, because we want meaning, we want understanding, and if you get rid of it in one part, you need to find it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also the meaning has to be something that you find like deeply satisfying, or
Sure.
you won't accept it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost something like the big, when a religion gets too popular, everyone knows the answers.
Yeah.
That it offers, and therefore they're not secret anymore, and so they're not special. And so if you're Christian and you're miserable and your church is like, why are you miserable? Here are all the answers to all your questions. Here's how you behave. Here's what's going to happen when you die. You're good, and you still feel unfulfilled. And then someone else comes over and says, "Hey, I got another explanation.
Yeah.
And it's a secret. Nobody else knows about it, but I can let you know about it, and it'll make you happy."
It's exactly what the Kabbalah is, which is what Diatavelli is really into, right? That's his whole thing, because it's like, well, yes, but if you take the numbers, if you take the, it's the whole thing where you take the letters of the Hebrew Bible and then you like basically do arithmetic on them, and you come up with like, well, if you add the first letter of each of these words together, then it adds up to create the name of this mountain, and the mountain, and it's like you can do that endlessly, right?
Yeah.
And convince yourself that you've done something meaningful, because like, well, it's the book written by God, it's the most important thing in the world. Of course all of these things would be in there, and anything you find in there must be true.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an infinite capacity to just make shit up, basically. And it makes me wonder if Diatavelli was his sin indulging in Kabbalah in the first place, or I think it's Kabbalah, whatever.
I don't know. Yeah.
Or was the sin, the fact that they made this plan, which they knew was false,
I don't feel like Eco is mean to Kabbalah in this book.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like he's taking swipes at it in the same kind of barbed way that he's taking swipes at a lot of the other stuff here. I mean, like, isn't the book is divided into 10 sections, and those are like stages of the Sephirot, right?
Yeah,
So like, I don't know. I don't know enough about Kabbalah to like say with certainty one way or the other. But it seems like it's a much less barbed swipe to me. I don't know.
If I agree, it kind of felt like that subjectively to me as well. So, all right, are we good talking about?
Yeah, another question we don't have an answer to.
Yeah, right. So here we have another moment of Belbo's history. Then came the turning point when we were about 100 meters from the station. There stood the first houses of the town, and though they were few, they created a web of narrow paths. There the boldest group dashed forward, fearless, while I, and, luckily for me, a few others slowed down and ducked behind the corners of the houses to watch from a distance. If Martinetti had organized us into vanguard and rearguard, we would have done our duty, but this was a spontaneous deployment, those with guts in front and the cowards behind. So from our refuges, mine was farthest back than the others, we observed the conflict, which never took place. The two groups came within a few meters of each other and stood in confrontation, snarling. Then the leaders stepped toward the center. Yalta. They decided to divide their territories into zones and agreed to allow occasional safe conduct passes, like Christians and Muslims in the Holy Land. Solidarity between groups of knights had prevailed over the electability of battle. Each side had proved itself. The opposing camps withdrew in harmony, still opponents in opposite directions. Now I tell myself that I didn't rush into the attack because I found it laughable. But that's not what I told myself then. Then I felt like a coward, and that was that. Today, even more cowardly, I tell myself that, as it turned out, I would have risked nothing had I charged with the others, and my life afterward would have been better. I missed opportunity at the age of 12. If you fail to have an erection the first time, you're impotent for the rest of your life. A month later, some random trespass brought the Alley and Carnal alley and canal gangs face to face in the field, and clods of earth began to fly. I don't know whether it was because the outcome of the earlier conflict had reassured me, or because I desired martyrdom, but one way or another, this time I stood in the front line. A clod, which concealed a stone, struck my lip and split it. I ran home crying, and my mother had to use tweezers from her toilet case to pick pieces of earth out of the wound on the inside of my lip. In fact, I was left with a lump next to the lower right canine, and even now, when I wrung my tongue over it, I feel a vibration, a shudder. But this lump does not absolve me, because I got it through heedlessness, not through courage. If I run my tongue over my lip, and what do? I write. But bad literature brings no redemption.
So, I mean, this kind of ties into the conversation we were having a few minutes ago. I mean, this is one of the core events for Belbo, right? Like, and it's so ridiculous to me because, like, his moment of failure, his moment of failure to have an erection, his missed opportunity in his mind is when two groups of kids didn't even fight each other. They charged forward to fight and then ended up talking and coming to an agreement. And he looks at this as like the example of his lack of courage, of his failure to seize opportunity. And of course, what does he do? Well, at the next moment, he throws himself right into opportunity heedlessly and immediately gets hurt. And that is Belbo for the rest of his life, because even if he has this seeming awareness of this issue, that's what he keeps doing. That's his relationship with Lorenza, his throwing himself into the plan, his participation. He both hides and then pokes out at moments and seizes. This is why he's such a fascinating character to me.
Yeah, right. And I mean, in truth, he should just sort of forgive himself for the mistake that he made when he was a little kid. But he's come to see this as just being typical of his personality.
Yeah,
and he's let it define him.
It's not even a mistake, though. It's just like some idiots charged each other. It'd be one thing if, like, in the first charge there was a battle and he didn't, like, it's just ridiculous. And I don't know if your audiobook there's a later scene where he's talking about this moment with his uncle. It was like when his grandmother is lying down in a field as two sides of the conflict around his hometown is raging and bullets are flying, and his moment of heroism, he says, is when he stands up in view of the window even when his uncle tells him not to, and his uncle has to, like, drag him down to the floor. And even that, he's, like, self-deprecating, and, like, that's my moment of heroism, is this moment where I stood when I shouldn't have. My uncle had to pull me to the floor, and I lived. And, like, everything about him in his life is failure in his mind. Like, everything he's done, everything he's accomplished, it's all either hidden or failure. And
right, it's a horrible trap he's put himself in, where everything he doesn't do is because he's a coward, and everything he does do is because he's careless.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, nah, man, just go see a psychiatrist.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just talk to someone.
Yeah.
No, instead he's gonna help invent a plan and then try to frame this guy that he thinks his girlfriend likes, and it's the exact wrong person to do that to.
Yeah.
I didn't pull a slide on it. I'm curious if when you got to the bomb on the train, if you were immediately like, oh, that's a bomb.
I think that I knew something was up pretty quickly. I was still pretty amused to find that it was a bomb, because I was like, okay, well, now we're finally getting into the actual plot. No, I did not immediately know that it was a bomb, though.
Okay. So, I was immediately like, oh, this guy's trying to blow him up.
Yeah.
Or it turns out
frame
just
him as a terrorist, actually.
Frame him,
yeah.
All right, so this is kind of the inciting incident of part of the book. This is like 200 pages in, by the way. This is how this book works. But this is when Colonel Ardenti, who has cracked the Templars' code, comes to their publishing house and lays down his interpretation of it. Here we go. "This is the decoded message?" Belbo asked, disappointed and amused. Obviously, the dolts at Ingolf's transcription stand for words that were illegible. Perhaps the parchment was damaged in places. The dots, not the dolts. But I made a final transcription and translation based on surmises that are, if I do say so myself, unassailable. I've restored the text to its ancient splendor, as the saying goes. With a magician's gesture, he flipped over the photocopy and showed us his notes, printed in capitals. The Night of St. John, 36 years post-Hest Haywain, 6 messages intact with seal. For the knights within the white cloaks, Templars. Relapsee of Provence for vain gents. Revenge. 6 times 6 in 6 places. Each time 20 years makes 120 years. This is the plan. The first go to the castle. Iterum, again after 120 years. The second join those of the bread, again to refuge, again to Our Lady beyond the river, again to the hostels of the Poplicans, again to the stone. 3 times 6, 666, before the feast of the great whore. Clear as mud, Bobo said. Of course, it still needs interpretation, but Ingolf surely must have done that, as have I. If you know history of the Order, it's less obscure than it seems. He paused. He asked for a glass of water and went over the text with us again, word by word.
These people are idiots.
It's so funny because obviously the big thing is that Casaubon's girlfriend looks at this near the end of the book and says, it's a laundry list.
Yeah.
This is just some guy's laundry list. And that's the book never says that for sure, but that's what he ends up believing by the end of the story, that it's just a laundry list. And the thing that's wild about this is they obviously think he's insane and stupid, but the entire premise of the plan is that at least this part, or the data in this part, is true, and they build the connections of the plan off of this. Like they spend most of their time finding out what these 6 places are, or making up what they think these 6 places are, and they never stop to think if maybe the Colonel's unassailable interpretation is wrong. Just wrong.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's funny because now that you see it on the page, you can see that the places that he puts his little assumptions, which are the little parentheticals, are in some places just ridiculous.
Yeah, vein jets.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like adding, completing a word in a way that it's like, well, I suppose you could complete it that way, but why would you? And then 3 times 6, 666. Yeah. That's not what he's talking
really
about
what
here.
3 times 6 is. Pretty sure it's 18, guy.
Yeah. No, and then I think my favorite part is the way you chose to end this, where it says, they're basically laughing at him, or at least Belbo isn't taking it seriously. And then he says, if you know the history of the Order, it's less obscure than it seems. And then there's a pause, and then they all go over it again together, because now they're like, well, of course I know the history of the Order, and I didn't miss anything. So show me that again now, so I can prove that I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And like that's part of the thing. They're always like competing to be the smartest and cleverest. Yep. And so none of them is going to let this get away from them as like an opportunity to show off, which is their downfall.
Yeah. And of course, it's so funny because he basically has an interpretation of where he thinks each and every one of these places is. And they think that's ridiculous, and part of their game is to invent the actual reasonable ones that where it could be. And even like some of Casaubon's are ridiculous. Like when they decide the bread is in Scotland, because like I think like there's cake there. It's like there was a battle about cake that maybe Templars were involved in. And, yes, this must be the bread. Yeah.
Right. It's something that came up in relation to the Templars, and so that's definitely where they had their important meeting. I mean, and that's the thing, is like if you step back from it, the very idea that your order is going to have meetings spread out over centuries, organized it like generation by generation by your descendants or what, like this, it's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Why would anyone ever do this?
It's fucking ridiculous.
And I don't remember if the book ever even puts forth a reason why someone would do this.
Oh, because of they have the secret to the
telluric currents.
To the telluric currents, yeah.
Okay, but why does it need to take 400 years? I forget that detail.
Because
I think you're right. There was an explanation for that too, though.
There was a ridiculous one, yeah. But I mean, just because, man, because that was the only time it was going to be safe was the year 2000. But you see, somewhere along the way, the plan failed because it changes the calendar, and they forgot their
Right.
calendar was changed.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the wild stuff. Like, there was not. The thing about these kind of plans is there was no universal anything, right? There was not
Uh-huh.
universal time. There was not universal calendar. Like, this is before the world unified under any kind of specific kind of measurement. And to think that, like, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea of the plan is absurd.
Yeah,
I'll just put it that
it
way.
is, and they know that too, and that's why it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. All right, shall we move on
Yeah,
to our next slide here?
let's go to
Uh,
Brazil.
yes, in Brazil, Casaban and his lady friend Amparo witness a ritual and get swept up into it. It was then that I saw Amparo. Now I know that Hesed is not only the Sephirah of grace and love. As Diotavelli said, it is also the moment of expansion of the divine substance which spreads out to the edge of infinity. It is the care of the living for the dead, but someone must also have observed that it is the care of the dead for the living. Striking the Agog, I no longer followed what was happening in the hall, focused as I was on my own control, letting myself be led by the music. Amparo must have come in at least 10 minutes before, and surely she had felt the same effect I had experienced earlier. But no one had given her an agogo, and by now she probably wouldn't have wanted one. Called by deep voices, she had stripped herself of all defenses, of all will. I saw her fling herself into the midst of the dancing, stop, her abnormally tense face looking upward, her neck rigid. Then, oblivious, she launched into a lewd saraband, her hands miming the offer of her own body. A Pombagira, someone shouted, delighted by the miracle, since until then the she-devil had not made her presence known. Oh, sweet. Yeah, some language I can't speak, sorry. Um, I didn't dare intervene. I may have accelerated the strokes of my little bar, trying to join carnally with my woman, or with the indigenous spirit she now incarnated. The Cambones went to her, had her put on the ritual vestment, and held her up as she came out of her brief but intense trance. They led her to a chair. She was soaked with sweat and breathed with difficulty. She refused to welcome those who brushed over to beg for oracles. Instead, she started crying. The gira was coming to an end. I left the platform and ran to Amparo. Aglaé was already there, delicately massaging her temples. How embarrassing, Amparo said. I don't believe in it. I didn't want to. How could I have done this? It happens, said Aglaé, said softly. It happens.
All right, so let's talk about this.
Yeah. So I think I specifically wanted to talk about this sort of thing because there's a couple of instances in this book where something magical actually seems to happen.
Yeah, like at the pendulum at the end, where these mediums secrete creatures.
Yeah, it's the pink goo from Ghostbusters.
Sure, sure. That comes up a lot in book club.
Yeah.
It's not the first time we talked about pink goo and Ghostbusters.
Yeah, it's kabbalistically relevant. But yeah, so like there does seem to be, or at least that's the thing. It's a question. Is the book saying that there really are like spirits that possess people, or is the book saying that this is yet another thing where people put into extreme situations are prone to hallucinate things?
I think that's exactly what it is. I mean, I think the moment at the end of the book, there's like shit in the air that they're inhaling. Like
Right.
shit's going crazy. I mean, Casaban has like a breakdown when he sees the Eiffel Tower and sees it as a monster that's like taking over the sky and ready to swoop out with its talons and stuff. It's just absolutely crazy passage where he's talking about the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, I think this is really interesting because Amparo is a character who, like, we've seen defined as, I think what she says, like, I do it, but I don't believe in it. Well, I'm the person where I don't do it, but I do believe in it. Like, she didn't really buy into any of these rituals or this crap, but finds herself swept up into this in a way she doesn't quite understand. And I think that's kind of meant to demonstrate that how easy it is for the human mind to get lulled into this thing that is like, that's like these rituals. It's part of like disarming your resistance to the absurdity of it. Like we're such group minded animals, right? That like
Yeah.
that a group doing a thing has this ability to suck us into it because we want to be part of the group, and that's the way these kind of rituals work, especially when you start throwing in like strange shit in the air that causes us to hallucinate or at least gets our mind a little dizzy. It's just like, I mean, even in Christianity there are some sects that believe in like I forget what it's called specifically, but they have like the people who do the babbling or the speak, like, you know, they like, I forget
Yeah.
what it's called.
Speaking in tongues. Yeah.
Yeah, the speaking in which I've like even when I was going to church regularly, I found that really really strange that people were into. That really makes me uncomfortable. But it's that kind of same thing. It's just like you get enough people together in a room that strongly believe that X is possible, then they can convince other people of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of the same phenomenon as hypnotism, which is,
Sure.
real. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then when there's drugs involved, right? Like, I guess that's the thing I wanted to discuss particularly, because the scene at the end with the ectoplasm, I was like, huh, ectoplasm. This seems like maybe might really be happening actually.
Right. It definitely crosses a line.
It's basically, the line is like, either this is really happening or Casabon has really lost it.
I think he definitely regardless, he's lost it.
Yeah, I think there's some stuff I want to say about the way the book ends, but I kind of want to leave that till the end.
Sure. All right. Well, let's move on with this. Just as like, I do think this is laying the groundwork for that event that happens at the end for sure.
Yeah.
Because even Casabon gets swept up into it himself.
Right.
All right, so we move on from Brazil to the beginnings of the plan start to come together. This is one of those passages where I didn't pull a lot of them debating and arguing about this kind of stuff, but I found this particularly delightful. Not bad, Bilbo said, but what particularly intrigues me are these 500 pages on the pyramids. Did you know that the pyramids of Cheops sits right on the 13th parallel, which is the one that crosses the greatest stretch of land above sea level? That the geometric ratios found in the pyramid of Cheops, how do you pronounce? I don't know that word at all.
I think it's just Cheops.
Are the same ones found at Pedra Pintada and Amazonia. That Egypt possessed two plumed serpents, one on the throne of Tutankhamun and the other on the pyramid of Saqqara, and the latter serpent points to Quetzalcoatl. What does Quetzalcoatl have to do with the Amazonia if he's part of the Mexican pantheon? I asked. Well, maybe I missed a connection, but for that matter, how do you explain the fact that the statues of Easter Island are megalith exactly like the Celtic ones, or that the Celtic ones, or that the Polynesian god called Yah is clearly the Yod of the Jews, as is the ancient Hungarian Ayov, the great and good god, or that the ancient Mexican manuscript shows the earth as a square surrounded by sea, and in its center is a pyramid that has on its base the inscription Aztlan, which is close to Atlas and Atlantis. Why are the pyramids found on both sides of the Atlantic? Because it's easier to build pyramids than spheres, because the wind produces dunes in the shape of pyramids and not in the shape of the Parthenon. I hate the spirit of the Enlightenment, Diotavelli says. Let me continue. The cult of Ra doesn't appear in Egypt religion before the new empire, and therefore it comes from the Celts. Remember St. Nicholas and his sleigh? In prehistoric Egypt, the ship of the sun was a sleigh. Since there was no snow in Egypt, the sleigh's origin must have been Nordic. I couldn't let that pass. Before the invention of the wheel, sleighs were also used on sand. And this is like... The thing is that is absolutely true about everything they do in this book. Is every single one of it has a completely rational, normal explanation. Why? Yeah. Like I've listened to people say the mystery of how there is a pyramid in South America and a pyramid in Egypt, like civilizations thousands of years apart across the world. How did they both build these pyramids? It's like, because that's a simple structure to build.
Right. If you have blocks and you want to make them into a shape, that the pyramid is the shape you're going to get. Yeah, and I mean it's the thing is, for every one of these connections that it takes 1 minute to make, it takes 5 minutes to think of the knockdown argument for why that's not really a valid connection. And in a certain sense, you can't ever really say it's an impossible connection, because like, hey, maybe the Polynesian god Yah is related to Yod of the Jews. Who knows, man? It's possible, I guess. Like, you can't rule it out. We don't have the evidence one way or the other.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just very weak. It's just very, very weak. And just by adding 100 weak things doesn't make like a strong case.
Well, and you see here what you can do. Like he points out, what does Quetzalcoatl have to do with Amazonia? That's not wrong God, wrong pantheon. And
Yeah. Well, nevertheless.
yeah, and it's like, I missed a connection. And then pivot. How do you explain this and this and this? Well, obviously here's one explanation, but what about this and this and this? You can't explain this. It's like, no, it's they use sleds on sand.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. How come all these religions are all similar if you really, really squint your eyes?
Maybe because
Yeah.
people are not that creative.
Yeah. Right. And also the stories themselves are pretty simple.
Yeah.
They're always like fathers and sons killing each other. And
Yeah. Almost
so,
as if
yeah.
I mean, we just look at the world around us and make stories about it, and turns out this is what the idea of the monomyth is all about, is that just like there's some innate humanity that comes into some of the most simplest and basic stories.
Yeah.
Which is like parents and betrayal and violence and cruelty and
Growing up.
why does bad happen to me?
Yeah.
Why
What
flood?
is the
Why is
sun?
there a flood?
Yeah. All right. Yes, that stuff is very fun, and I do enjoy that stuff. I don't have much more to say about that.
The problem is, like, again, I'll repeat, the problem is that comes one page intermixed with 50 pages of really, really like name and date heavy ruminations on the Rosicrucians or the Masons, and it's just like the weird thing about this for me is I actually really like history. Like I love studying history. I love reading nonfiction history. I enjoy it. I really enjoy it. But the way Eco chooses to write the history of these groups here, it's almost like designed impenetrability. Like it's fascinating to me that he's constructing a narrative via the plan, but the way he writes the history of these people, it's almost narrative averse. He doesn't want to actually tell a story with it. He just wants to throw a lot of names at you and then say, well, this must connect because Atlas kind of sounds like Atlantis.
Right. And fundamentally, it's the he wants there to be a connection, right? And when you want there to be a connection, you're going to be able to find some path that makes the connection happen. It's not reasoning from first principles. It's reasoning from last principles. You've already written the last line of your argument. You're just trying to work your way toward it.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. All right. So next slide, we have the beginnings of the plan coming together in these sorts of
11.
Sorry. No, that's what we have is Belbo. Oh no. Belbo talks with his obsessive love interest, Lorenza. Why Simon and Sophia? Belbo insisted. Is his name Simon? It's a wonderful story. Did you know that our universe is the result of an error and that it's partly my fault? Sophia was the female part of God, because God then was more female than male. If it was you men who later put a beard on him and started calling him he. I was his good half. Simon says I tried to create the world without asking permission. I, the Sophia, who is also called, wait a minute, the Enoia. But my male part didn't want to create. Maybe he lacked the courage or was impotent. So instead of uniting with him, I decided to make the world by myself. I couldn't resist. It was through an excess of love. Which is true. I adore this whole mixed-up universe. And that's why I'm the soul of this world, according to Simon. How nice. Does he give that line to all the girls? No, stupid, just to me, because he understands me better than you do. He doesn't try to create me in his image. He understands I have to be allowed to live my own life in my own way. And that's what Sophia did. She flung herself into making the world. She came up against primordial matter, which was disgusting, probably because it didn't use a deodorant. And then I think she accidentally created the demi. How do you say it? You mean the demiurge? Yeah, that's him. Yes. Or maybe it wasn't Sophia who made this demiurge. Maybe it was already around and she egged him on. Get moving, silly. Make the world, and then we'll have real fun. The demiurge must have been a real screw up because he didn't know how to make the world properly. In fact, he shouldn't have tried it because matter is bad and he wasn't authorized to touch the stuff. Anyway, he made this awful mess, and Sophia was caught inside, prisoner of the world. Lorenzo was drinking a lot. A number of people had started dancing sleepily in the center of the room, their eyes closed, and Ricardo came by every few minutes and filled her cup. Belbo tried to stop him, saying she had already had too much to drink, but Ricardo laughed and shook his head, and she said indignantly that she could hold her alcohol better than Jacopo because she was younger.
Okay, let's talk about Lorenza, who sucks. The thing that's so fascinating, and the reason I pulled this one in particular, is we have this character, Belbo, who throughout the course of the story, we know he's like very smart, very witty, very quick-witted, invents all these things, passionate, and we have this woman that he's absolutely obsessed with, right? 100% obsessed with this woman. And here in this moment, we see that she's just kind of dumb and unimpressive and like not into any of the things that he's into. Like it doesn't make any sense at all why he's so obsessed with her. And I think that's part of his whole thing, right? That like here's this woman that he's not compatible with at all. And I mean, she's a little drunk here, but also like she came against the primordial matter, which just was disgusting, probably because it didn't use a deodorant. It's just, she's just like not Belbo at all.
She's kind of making fun of him.
Yeah.
And not taking him seriously. I find that's a trait. The female characters in the story tend to mock the male characters.
Yeah.
I mean, there's really only two that I can think of. No, two or three. Yeah, there's at least three. Anyway, yeah, no. I mean, I think my version of the book didn't have very much about Lorenza at all. Like as a person, she was just sort of this figure that Belbo was obsessed with.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't think you probably missed too much of that. Like she'll just kind of pop in, and then like he'll start acting weird, and then she'll leave again, of course, because that's what she does. 'Cause she comes away with him for the weekend, and then a day later says, "I'm going back to Milan," and he's like, "What?"
Yeah,
but he just puts up with it.
Yeah, her role basically seems to be to stress him out and keep him off balance. And
interesting. Tringard says this is the first point in the audiobook, because Tringard also did the audiobook that you did, that we really saw Lorenza talk at all. I think that's accurate for the novel as well.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. It's interesting because the women characters tend to bring a sort of practical counterpoint or a more whimsical concept. Like that's the thing where I can't quite let go of the idea that maybe there is some reality to all this magic stuff, because like maybe he is actually saying that like the female side is the side of wisdom and the side of creation, and the men who lack the creative spark are just doomed to constantly rearrange Kabbalistic symbols without ever actually creating anything.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, I agree with the character like Leah, but I don't think Lorenza. I think she sucks. Like, I really, like, I don't know, maybe I'm getting swept up too much into the novel, but she treats this guy like shit, and she knows what she's doing, and she knows that he knows what she's doing, and she knows that he's powerless to do anything about it.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think I disagree with that, and I think you probably have more data than me. I think my impression was more of a split in my condemnation between her and Belbo, because yes, she treated him like shit, but also Belbo obviously wanted someone like this, like for the reasons we talked about earlier. Like he only wants the sort of woman who he doesn't believe he deserves.
Oh, certainly,
like,
yeah.
Like it's a screwed up like cycle for him.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is like we get the understanding that what is happening right here is like they're a night for them. This is just what happens whenever they're together. That
just her drinking a lot, and yeah.
Well, and like it's so funny because like Simon and Sophia, like they have pet names for each other, and like they're doing this right in front of Belbo just to piss him off, And I mean, I think Tringard says they couldn't decide if she believed what she was saying here or was just mocking the way they talk. I think it's a little of both. I do. I think she's having fun with that she has this cute little in joke with Simon, quote unquote Simon, and just enjoying the way he's doting upon her with all these terms that she only half understands. Like, I think she accidentally created the demi, how do you say it? Like, she just can't remember what a demiurge is. And I mean, I think that's I mean, it's also partially that she's drunk.
Right. I mean, she could also be pretending not to remember what demiurge is, just to.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I kind of doubt that.
Yeah, that wasn't my read, at least.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think she sucks. I mean, I feel bad when she's murdered at the end of the movie or the book. I certainly didn't want her to die, but I do think she represents this. I think we're supposed to be wondering why Bilbo is so obsessed with this woman.
Yeah. Well, I think I was wondering that. Like, I think I thought at various times, like, so for a lot of this book, I wasn't sure if we were in like a Da Vinci Code situation where like everyone in the story is like secretly spying on our main characters because they're actually onto something and they all know it, you know, like you know, the cop and just all the characters. Maybe all the characters are in on some grand conspiracy and our main characters have figured out something important, and that's what this story is going to be, which it sort of is and sort of isn't actually. But I kind of thought at various times, like, is Lorenza going to turn out to be like the reason she's into Bilbo at all is because she's like trying to spy on him and you know, get their top secret plan documents or whatever. But I don't think that's true at all. But
no, I mean, I will say that is where I thought things maybe were heading at some point. Because it does seem like that is a possibility. And I mean, it turns out that, yes, the plan is real, but only because they made it. And it's just, that's the absurdity of people. It's not like there is people listening in on them by the end of it, but only because they told people about this stuff.
Tringard makes a good point, which is he says, I've known lots of people obsessed with people either out of their league or not a good fit. So I just thought it was like that and felt bad for Bilbo for not seeing it.
Yeah.
It's just fairly straightforward explanation.
I've definitely been that person as well. I do like there's a moment when, like, I think she just flirts with everyone. That's just the type of person she is. She's just kind of a flirt. And there's a moment when Casaubon is like, I think when I don't know if this is in the audiobook, but there's a night where he thinks that she's scratching on his door to be let in because, and she's like, oh yeah, I want this chick now too. And it's just so silly.
I do remember that. And I was like, what the hell is this? Because I was like, it could totally just be nothing, right?
Yeah. It could be like an animal. It could be a mouse.
Yeah, this is one of those that was one of the instances that made me first think, like, is Casaubon just crazy? And I'm not sure how I was supposed to take that actually. It was kind of weird. Not that I'm going to reread it, but it was one of the things where I'm like, I didn't really know how to interpret what was happening there.
Yeah, I mean, were we supposed to believe that was actually Lorenza doing that? Like, I don't know.
I don't think so. In retrospect, I don't think so. Although at the time, I thought maybe. But
I mean, it would be very like Lorenza to start flirting with Bilbo's friends just to annoy him. Like, absolutely. But like, that would only benefit her if she did it in front of him. Like, so a late night rendezvous. I just don't see her doing it.
Yeah, and I don't think she would see anything in Casaubon either. So.
No, definitely not. Yeah. All right, so they set up the computer to spit out random sentences, and here's the Da Vinci Code, Matt. The next morning, Bilbo was radiant. It works, he said. It works beyond anything we could have hoped for. He handed us the printout. The Templars have something to do with everything. What follows is not true. Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. The sage Omus founded the Rosy Cross in Egypt. There are Kabbalists in Provence. Who was married at the Feast of Cana? Minnie Mouse is Mickey's fiancée. It logically follows that if the Druids venerated black virgins, then Simon Magus identifies Sophia as a prostitute of Tyre, who was married at the Feast of Cana. The Merovingians proclaim themselves kings by divine right. The Templars have something to do with everything. A bit obscure, Diotavelli said, because you don't see the connections, and you don't give due importance to the question that recurs twice. Who was married at the Feast of Cana? Repetition are magic keys. Of course I've compiled, but compiling the truth is the initiate's right. Here is my interpretation. Jesus was not crucified, and for that reason the Templars denied the crucifix. The legend of Joseph of Arimathea covers a deeper truth. Jesus, not the Grail, landed in France, among the Kabbalists of Provence. Jesus is the metaphor of the King of the world, the true founder of the Rosicrucians. And who landed with Jesus? His wife. In the Gospels, why aren't we told who was married at Cana? It was the wedding of Jesus, and it was a wedding that could not be discussed because the bride was a public sinner, Mary Magdalene. That's why, ever since, all the Illuminati, from Simon Magus to Postel, seek the principle of the eternal feminine in a brothel. And Jesus, meanwhile, was the founder of the royal line of France. So this is basically the Da Vinci Code. Not quite, but basically the Da Vinci Code.
Right. What's funny is, before I had the timeline straight, I thought that maybe he was making fun of the Da Vinci Code, but of course, this is written before the Da Vinci Code.
Pre-Da Vinci Code.
But I mean, I think like that is, you know, the idea the Da Vinci Code came from is all this, you know, Merovingian kings stuff. And it's funny because, you know, when you start talking about Joseph of Arimathea, I'm like, oh yeah, Alexandretta, man.
Jesus. I like how they just ignore Minnie Mouse as Mickey's fiance.
Well, you see, in this usage, I believe Jesus is Mickey Mouse.
Of course.
And this thing about the Druids, it's, what does the Druids have to do with anything? It's just,
well, if they venerated black virgins, then Simon Magus identifies Sophia as the prostitute. So obviously.
I see. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I like. I mean, I think it says it right here. Like the idea where it's like, oh, you have to interpret it. And you know what Belbo means when he says interpretation is just like wildly confabulate a story that only vaguely resembles the stuff that you just looked at. And that's how people do history, apparently.
It totally is. And Tringard points out, like, structurally this makes it look similar to the Templar laundry list of the beginning, like to point out just the similarities between nonsense spit out by a computer and nonsense you found on a scroll with 30 missing letters that you decided to just fill in yourself. I mean, it's the same exercise.
Absolutely.
But it's very easy to do. I mean, he did it like that.
And they should have noticed that.
Yep. All right. It's finally time to talk about the only level-headed character in this entire book, Matt.
Yeah. Here is a scene where Casaubon becomes a father. I mumbled some excuse in haste. I believe I said, "My girlfriend's having a baby tomorrow." Salon haltingly offered me congratulations, as if not sure who the father was. I ran home to breathe some clean air. Leah wasn't in. On the kitchen table, a piece of paper. "Darling, the waters have broken. Couldn't get you at the office. Taking a taxi to the hospital. Come, I feel alone." Moment of panic. I had to be there to count with Leah. I should have been in the office, reachable. It was my fault. The thing would be born dead. Leah would die with it. Salon would stuff them both. I entered the hospital on unsteady legs, asked directions of people who didn't know anything, twice ended up in the wrong ward. I shouted that they had to know where Leah was having the baby, and they told me to calm down because here everybody was having a baby. Finally, I don't know how, I found myself in a room. Leah was pearly pale but smiling. Someone had lifted her hair and put it under a white cap. For the first time I saw Leah's forehead in all its splendor. Next to her was the thing. "It's Giulio," she said. "My Rebbe. I, too, had made him, and not with chunks of dead bodies or arsenic soap. He was whole, all his fingers and toes were in the right place. I insisted on seeing all of him, his little cock, his big balls. Then I kissed Leah on her naked brow. The credit is yours, darling. It all depends on the vessel." "Of course the credit is mine, you shit. I had to count all by myself." "For me, you were all that counts," I told her.
So yeah, this is just a great moment that I thought was a great way for us to talk about Leah, who is the most wonderful, level-headed, and I think everything you said about Lorenza's role, I think is spot on for Leah. Like, I'm
Sure.
absolutely convinced that, like, at every pass, every time she learns what Casaubon is doing, she like tries to set him straight. Like the speech where she like explains to him the magic of the human body as for why he should stop looking for all the stuff elsewhere, I think is really great. Like the magic numbers of the body, like 1 because we have 1 of each of these, 2 because we have 2, and there's no 3s in our body, so that's a magic number, and she just works her way. It's just this wonderful, powerfully written speech that I just loved.
Hmm.
She always sets him straight, which is why he kind of distances himself from her more and more.
Yeah, right. She pokes a hole in his balloon.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's great. I mean, I maybe I'm bringing in too much like thematic impetus from like literally the Da Vinci Code. Um, but I kept thinking about the fact that like it's a prominent part of the story that um, uh, Casaubon becomes a father, and Leah is the mother. They have a child, which is this kind of miracle. And he he seems relatively disinterested in this.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's not the worst father in the world, but he's very easily distracted from the fact that he took part in creating life, um, and goes back to trying to ponder the imponderable deep mysteries of the universe. And it's like, hey, you've got like the most important and most meaningful thing you're ever going to do sitting right here in front of you.
Yeah.
There's nothing more. You're not going to find anything more deeper and more meaningful than this. I mean, I actually think it's super poetic right here where he says the credit is yours. It all
Mm-hmm.
depends on the vessel, and it's like he's absolving himself of any like involvement
Yeah.
in the creation of. And it's like, no, man. Like, I mean, yeah, she carried the baby, but like, if you're going to just say like I had nothing to do with this, then you're like counting yourself out of the most profound act of creation that it's possible for humans to undertake.
Yeah. I mean, he missed the birth because he was
Yeah.
off fucking around with this bullshit
Right.
that is made
Yes.
up, and he knows is made up. That's the wild thing about it, is like there is no reason for them to be doing any of this.
Uh-huh.
Like it has nothing to do with the publishing house, right? Like they're supposed to be reading Diabolica manuscripts and helping publish that, and for the whole um, like self-funded authors Ponzi scheme they're running. This has nothing to do with any of that. They're not getting this. Isn't for a job. It's not for anything. It's for their own amusement, and they're becoming obsessed with it to the point that it's ripping them away from the things in their life that actually matter, like your child being born.
Hmm.
And like I know it's maybe a different time, a different part of the world, different time, but like I don't know about you. When my kid was born, I knew exactly how to navigate from the front door of the hospital to exactly which part of the hospital the baby
Uh-huh.
birthing was going to happen in. Like I did a practice run before like I was ready to go, and he just like wandering around shouting like where's my, I don't know, where
Yeah.
um it's yeah, it's like come on, dude. And like it's I don't know, I love the sentence, I too had made him, and not with chunks of dead bodies or arsenic soap, which I know is calling back to some previous stuff, but that's a wild thing to say when seeing your child for the first time.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it just shows how elsewhere his mind is,
Yeah.
right? I mean, even when this starts, like I don't remember exactly what happens before this, but it's like he says I ran home to breathe some clean air. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember what it was, but something super weird had happened before
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Um, and he was like trying to get his head on right, and then oh, my kid's being born right now. And it's just all very like he's kind of already losing the plot. Like
Yeah.
some like he seems to be so easily agitated by stuff at this point in the story that I was like, is he already? I mean, I don't think this is super well supported by the text, but I'm like, is he having schizophrenia basically? Like
Mm-hmm.
is this the onset of schizophrenia in this character? Because one of the features of that disease is like the connection of ideas that make no sense, and and like increasingly pervasive hallucinations and paranoia, and these are all things that over the course of the book become more severe for Casaubon until I'm just gonna like sort of spoil what I was gonna say at the end, like until he's like on the run, convinced people are coming to kill him. Like, is it possible the Belbo's not even dead? Like he just hallucinated the entire thing and he's just raving on the streets of Paris somewhere?
Extremely possible. I
Yeah.
mean, the only thing we know, like he even breaks down the facts, right? Belbo not answering his phone, but that's not the first time that's happened.
Uh-huh.
His boss at the publishing agency is Garamond is out of town, so he maybe was in France. That's it. The end. That's all we know for sure.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I mean, and like the last line of this thing, for me, you are all that counts, is just a lie. And it's like, I feel bad for Leah. She's like trying to wrangle this guy, and he's so distracted with other stuff.
Yeah. Yep. Can't even make an honest woman out of her.
All right. We're going to jump pretty far ahead now to the end of the book, though. We're getting through all the plan making. I didn't want to pull those slides. We are here now at the Pendulum. Belbo is being interrogated, and Casaubon is watching. So here's this part. Aglier insisted, conciliatory, paternal. I understand your irritation, your reserve, how it must revolt you to confide an intimate and precious secret to a rabble that has just offered such an unedifying spectacle. Very well. You may confide your secret to me alone, whispering it in my ear. Now I will have you taken down, and I know you will tell me a word. A single word. Belbo said, You think so? Then Aglier changed his tone. I saw him imperious as never before, sacerdotal, hieratic. He spoke as if he had been one of the Egyptian vestments worn by his colleagues, but the note was false. He seemed to be parodying those whom he always treated with indulgent commiseration. At the same time, he spoke with the full assumption of his authority, for some purpose of his own mind that couldn't have been unintentional. He was introducing an element of melodrama. If he was acting, he acted well. Belbo seemed unaware of any deception, listening to Aglier as if he had expected nothing else from him. Now you will speak, Aglier said. You will speak, and you will join this great game. If you remain silent, you are lost. If you speak, you will share in the victory. For truly I say this to you, this night you and I and all of us are in Hod, the Sephirah of splendor, majesty, and glory. Hod, which governs ritual and ceremonial magic. Hod, the moment when the curtain of eternity is parted. I have dreamed of this moment for centuries. You will speak, and you will join only ones who will be entitled, after your revelation, to declare themselves masters of the world. Humble yourself, and you will be exalted. You will speak because I order you to speak, and my words efficunt quod figurant. And Belbo, now invincible, said, Magaf telenata. Which is not... I looked this up, and like no Italian would actually know what this means. The translation he says earlier in the book is, take the cork out of your ass.
Yeah, take the cork out. Which is a fantastic moment, and I think I saw it coming a little bit before it happened. But then Aglier is like, he didn't say anything. It's a really great moment.
Yeah,
it's a good climax for a story that doesn't really have a plot.
It is. I like this moment, and I found like the death of Belbo horrifying. Actually, I didn't pull the slide, but like strangling to death, wrapped around the wire of a pendulum is awful.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually really shocked and kind of surprised at how violent and awful all of that ending stuff was, assuming that it actually happened.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of like the three mediums die, and the woman dies, Belbo dies. Somebody else.
There's the implication that they like. There's a lot of killing that goes on. Like they all just kind of go crazy.
Yeah. Right. Which. See, that's the thing. I don't necessarily like this kind of ambiguity, because it got so crazy that I was like, okay, this has actually sort of reached the level of like farce, where I don't. So like I don't think I felt Bilbo's death as strongly as I maybe could have, because at that point I was like, this is ridiculous. Like this is a ridiculous farcical scene. This is not a um this doesn't feel climactic. This feels like a clown show because of how unrealistic and unbelievable this is. And then there's the other possibility that it's literally all hallucination. Um, so I don't know. Do you this is one of those things where it's like the audiobook can put a spin on things because maybe the way Tim Curry is reading it is making me see it as more sort of fanciful and ridiculous. But is that the sort of tone impression that you got as well?
No, yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a thing that happens sometimes in TV shows where like someone dies, right? Someone dies who you know cannot possibly die in the TV show. And so your brain immediately like switches gears and says, "Oh, dream sequence."
Uh-huh.
And like must be dream sequence. And I think there is some of that going on here where when the mediums start like secreting ectoplasm, where your brain says, "Okay, so this is a dream or a hallucination or something else." Like I I think the book had primed me on so much of the nonsense of all of this that I just actually didn't believe for a second that that was really happening. Like
Uh-huh.
my mind would not let me say, "Okay, it turns out there are magic powers and these three mediums are can summon ectoplasmic versions of the people they're channeling to reveal secrets or something." Um, but I
Yeah.
mean, but I will say, like, that being said, I do think the book does a really good job, dream sequence or no. Like, it's almost more important for Casaubon to understand Belbo, and therefore his death takes on meaning, even if it's made up. Because, watching the way Belbo died and the choice he made before he died to Casaubon makes him understand some fundamentals of life that are the thing that potentially pulls him out of this tailspin he's in.
Yeah. Yeah, potentially. Let's move on because I want to investigate that tailspin.
Okay.
If
Tringard
that's
says
okay.
that the way he became part of the pendulum gave weight to his death. The ritual was strange and mystical when chaos and death broke out. Then at that point, everything became real.
Mm. Yeah, sure. That's the thing is I literally was sort of like pursuing two parallel tracks in my head where I'm like, okay, I don't know if this is real or if this is meant to be a hallucination, and so I'm just going to read as though both could possibly be true and sort of keep the superposition alive in my mind, which maybe is what the author intended.
Well, I mean, like we got to step back and look at this for a minute because, like, I mean, if you think if Echo, if he wanted it to feel non supernatural, he would have had the mediums just like throw their voice, right?
Right.
Like their voice would have been thrown and they start answering to different names, and so it's like, oh yes, they're channeling the people, and that's easily explainable, right? Then you just go, oh, they've just been swept up similar to the way Amparo was back in Brazil.
Hmm.
But the choice to represent the channeling of the medium as the secretion of goo
Hmm.
is such an interesting choice. It's like he made that decision intentionally to make us feel something and it's either to represent that we've moved into a new plane of understanding or to fully represent the breakdown of our character's mind. It has to be one of those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's the latter because like the idea that these um paranoid fools could be the ones who actually understand the divine secrets of the universe, and they're here's a question for you, like why would these people be getting possessed by these spirits right here, like actually, like assuming it's real, why are these three spirits coming and possessing these three people?
No idea. They don't.
Like
I
there's
mean, they
no,
don't give them any actual answers. They just killed their hosts at
yeah,
the
the
end.
the people just which I think is the literal interpretation of that is like these people started foaming at the mouth due to the drugs they'd been given and they died.
Yeah,
Um, um, if they were even there in the first
yeah.
place, I don't know.
They could have just given them some drugs and they OD'd. Like
Yeah,
that's yeah.
yeah, okay, all right.
Like
Let's
I,
yeah.
I I do think you're right because I mean one thing that we haven't talked about a lot is that like the the framing device on this whole story is Casaubon is recalling is like doing multiple levels of recall.
Hmm.
He's actually sitting in Belbo's house in the countryside, recalling the time he was stuck in the periscope, waiting for midnight, and in that moments he recalled the past 15 years of his life.
Hmm.
And we see in the periscope and in the moments leading up to him getting in the periscope, it he becomes increasingly unhinged. Like he waits there for hours and hours. I just remember like he's looking around the museum and he's like ranting about how like the beginning of this book is so weird because he's like ranting about the mixture of the technology with the other parts of the museum and like you've sullied the beautiful nature of some of these things of the holy pendulum with these other more mundane, like he's just nuts. He's nuts.
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, I think the more I think about it, the more a lot of the things that happen in the story read as like the gradual onset of schizophrenia in a man,
Sure.
um, which is not something I was thinking about at the time, actually. But I don't think I'm going to reread this, but I am going to Google and see if that's a popular interpretation later.
Sure.
All right, so here we have Casaubon finally understanding his obsession and what it means. We invented a non-existent plan, and they not only believed it was real, but convinced themselves that they had been part of it for ages. Or rather, they identified the fragments of their muddled mythology as moments of our plan, moments joined in a logical, irrefutable web of analogy, semblance, suspicion. But if you invent a plan and others carry it out, it's as if the plan exists. At that point, it does exist. Hereafter, hordes of diabolicals will swarm through the world in search of the map. We offered a map to people who were trying to overcome a deep private frustration. What frustration? Belbo's first file suggested it to me. There can be no failure if there really is a plan. Defeated you may be, but never through any fault of your own. To bow to a cosmic will is no shame. You are not a coward, you are a martyr. You don't complain about being mortal, prey to 1,000 microorganisms you can't control. You aren't responsible for the fact that your feet are not very prehensile, that you have no tail, that your hair and teeth don't grow back when you lose them, that your arteries harden with time. It's because of the envious angels. The same applies to everyday life. Take stock market crashes. They happen because each individual makes a wrong move, and all the wrong moves put together create panic. Then whoever lacks steady nerve asks himself, who's behind this plot? Who's benefiting? He has to find an enemy, a plotter, or it will be, God forbid, his fault. If you feel guilty, you invent a plot, many plots, and to counter them you have to organize your own plot. But the more you invent enemy plots to exonerate your lack of understanding, the more you fall in love with them, and you pattern your own on their model, which is what happened when Jesuits and Baconians, Paulicans, Paulicians, and Neo-Templars each complained of the other's plan. Diotolevi remarks, of course, you attribute to the others what you're doing yourself, and since what you're doing yourself is hateful, the others become hateful. But since the others, as a rule, would like to do the same hateful thing that you're doing, they collaborate with you, hinting that, yes, what you attribute to them is actually what they have always desired. God blinds those he wishes to destroy. You just have to lend him a helping hand.
This is the part where I really fell in love with the book because I
Hmm.
really I loved this passage. I loved this idea. This I think Eco does such a good job of summing up his 600 previous pages in this moment, like to make everything make sense and understand how we get to this point. I think it just works. It works very well.
I agree. I like it a lot. I think I mean, it's very poetically written. It's
Hmm.
absolutely beautifully written. I mean, it was fun to read that.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I mean, like all of the sort of high literature we've read, it's like the sentences are just, you can just bathe in them. You don't even, you know, you don't even need to speak English to appreciate the beauty of them. They just sound great. Not that it was written in English, but the translation's really good too.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that. I mean, this is obviously an Italian novel that was translated, and it is a pretty good translation, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it. I mean, especially when Tim Curry's reading it, it sounds beautiful.
There can be no failure if there really is a plan. Defeated you may be, but never through any fault of your own. To bow to a cosmic will is no shame. You are not a coward. You are a martyr.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, that is like, I think, you know, I don't want to get too much into religion, but so many people grip to the idea of God's will, God's plan, because without it, it's scary out there. The idea that things are just happening and there's no rhyme or reason of them, and sometimes it's just because you fucked up, and sometimes it's just a stupid thing. It's you were looking at your phone when you should have been paying attention to the road, or just like, or someone else was that is out of your control. It's scary, and we want plans. We want cause and effect. We want to feel like the burden of existence is off of our shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And something else is going on.
Yeah, right. And also, I think the latter half of this page focuses more on the idea that we fall in love with the idea of having a specific enemy, a specific person or forces out there in the world that are conspiring against us and that are responsible for all of our woes. And you need to have some kind of handle. You need to feel like you have some kind of handle on the world. Otherwise, it's just too terrifying. Like if your savings are totally wiped out in a stock market crash, and you have no one to blame, exactly as he says, then the only person left to blame is you, and that's intolerable because you can't be responsible for your own loss. That would suck. So you find someone else, and it's the same with everything, really. Same with everything. We always want to blame our misfortune on someone else, and if possible, some complicated plot that we can then do something about. We want to feel like we can do something.
Yeah. Basically. Well, and I love, but since the others, as a rule, would like to do the same hateful thing that you're doing, they collaborate with you. So it's like, if I need you to be my enemy to be okay and to avoid my personal failings, and you want to do the same to me, then that's a reciprocal type of arrangement where I'm going to be the bad guy for you and you're going to be the bad guy for me, and then the world makes sense. All of the bad things that happen to me are your fault because you are working against me, and all of the bad things that happen to you are my fault because I am working against you. And then we never have to take responsibility, and we never have to feel guilty, and we never have to feel cowardly, and we never have to worry about anything because it's out of our control. It's your fault. It's the Templars' fault. It's the telluric current's fault. It's not my fault. Nothing's my fault. That's their plan. That's your plan. It's your fault.
Yeah.
It's brilliant in its simplicity, and it's the logic to it. Like, people behave this way all the time. We just don't put these kind of words on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's connecting a bunch of, I think that's the thing about this book that'll stick with me actually is this idea that like the instinct to find patterns where there may be none, and the instinct to find someone who's responsible for all of your woes are related. Because it's all part of this impulse to not blame ourselves for anything. So we find reasons why it's somebody else's fault or some system's fault that's outside of our control.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're all the protagonists of our own story,
Yeah.
and so we need an antagonist. And I that kind of ties into this idea that Bilbo like refuses to be the protagonist of his story. He even though he kind of is the protagonist of this story, kind of.
That's true. Yeah, I like that. That's funny.
Speaking of Bilbo, let's learn about his final moment here. You spend a life seeking the opportunity without realizing that the decisive moment, the moment that justifies birth and death, has already passed. It will not return, but it was full, dazzling, generous as every revelation. That day, Jacopo Bilbo stared into the eyes of truth, the only truth that was to be granted him, because, he would learn, Truth is brief. Afterward, it's all commentary. So he tried to arrest the rush of time. He didn't understand, not as a child, not as an adolescent when he was writing about it, not as a man who decided to give up writing about it. I understood it this evening. The author has to die in order for the reader to become aware of his truth. The pendulum, which haunted Jacopo Belbo his entire adult life, had been, like the lost addresses of his dream, the symbol of that other moment, recorded and then repressed when he truly touched the ceiling of the world. But that moment in which he froze space and time, shooting his Zeno's arrow, had been no symbol, no sign, symptom, illusion, metaphor, or enigma. It was what it was. It did not stand for anything else. At that moment, there was no longer any deferment, and the score was settled. Jacopo Belbo didn't understand that he had had his moment, and that it would have to be enough for him for all his life. Not recognizing it, he spent the rest of his days seeking something else, until he damned himself. But perhaps he suspected this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have returned so often to the memory of the trumpet. But he remembered it as a thing lost, not a thing possessed. I believe, I hope, I pray, that as he was dying, swaying with the pendulum, Jacopo Belbo finally understood this and found peace. So I find this idea terrifying and also comforting at the same time. This idea that, like, you know, we get one moment in our life, one moment that will define everything, and one moment, like, as he said, the moment that justifies birth and death, like this opportunity that Belbo was already looking for, and he was so obsessed with finding his opportunity that he didn't recognize that he already had it.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment we're talking about here is when he, like, is tapped by this funeral to play the trumpet at the funeral for these dead soldiers in his town. And he doesn't know the songs. He just plays notes, but it's this powerful moment where he feels like, where you just kind of transcend yourself a little bit. Like, just, it's one of those just powerful moments in your life. And he doesn't allow himself to understand the importance of that moment. He looks at the trumpet as a thing lost, not a thing possessed. Like, I never got my trumpet. And because I didn't get my trumpet, I didn't get the girl. And because I didn't get the girl, I could never be a writer. And because I could never be a writer, I was an editor, and then I was never successful. And everything is this long line of things, but you miss out on the things that you did have. I mean, it's also terrifying because, like, I don't want to miss that moment. Has that moment already occurred to me, my one moment, and I missed it? Is I wasn't paying attention?
Yeah, that's. I feel like you wouldn't have missed it because it would have been the most profound experience of your life, and it would be the one that you kept going back to. But
Jacopo did.
Well, that's the thing, is he recognized it as profound. He just, I love the wording here that I'm not gonna be able to find it with my eyes. Oh, he remembered it as a thing lost, not as a thing possessed.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think there is, that's the mistake, is you had that experience, Belbo. That experience lives with you forever. And you know, you're blessed, right? You're blessed to have had the experience. Some people never get one, or some people never get one that's as profound as that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you should feel grateful. You shouldn't say, "Oh, I need to recapture that." I mean, I could actually kind of get on board with this type of spirituality because, like, a lot of meditation and various spiritual traditions really are all about like sort of like God, or like the universe or whatever, is just like what is actually happening right now in this moment, and there's like a veil between your mind and that. And the goal of a spiritual life is to just be able to be present with the world as it actually is around you, like just purely present. And there's no, like he says here, there's no like extra spin on that. It's not like it just is what it is. It doesn't stand for anything. It's not a metaphor for something. It's not a sign of something. It's just, no, like, the universe is the holy thing. Actually, it's just that you can never actually, you're always so in your head that you're never perceiving the universe. And I think a story about these people who were constantly confabulating stories to amuse themselves is a perfect way of being like not ever being actually present. Um, which Belbo, like, he had this moment of presence, and trying to return to that moment of presence, he's gotten farther and farther away
Yeah,
from it.
I like that. Yeah, yeah, and it's reframing like he had this moment, and it would have to be enough for him for all his life, right? Like this idea that like the thing you have to understand is that like those moments come and go, and you may never get it back again. But that doesn't like you just take value in it, take comfort in it, take don't look for more meaning towards it. Just it's it happened and it was beautiful and it's gone now, but you can still remember it, and you don't remember it positively. Don't remember it as a thing I lost. Like that's
Yeah.
the tragedy of this story is like he had this moment and the moment ended, and then he goes home kind of awed by it, and is told the next day, the war's over, we're going back to Milan. You're never going to play in this band again. The end. It's over. So the trumpet is lost, right? The symbolic trumpet is lost. The moment is lost. And he lets that rule him until it damns him, as it says.
Yeah.
But he figured it out at the end, because he said no. He said no.
Yeah. He said no. He said take out the cork.
Mm-hmm.
It was great. He was brave, right? He stood up to them. So.
Well, and yeah, he didn't like he was a man so desperate for opportunity, and he was given an opportunity in this moment. He could have lied, he could have made something up, he could have said something that would have invited him into their fraternity, and at least for a little while, and he could have carried on with this kind of existence. But he's like, no, I don't want that.
Yeah.
I mean, it sucks that I don't like when people die, but
yeah,
maybe he didn't die.
Maybe he didn't. Maybe he's fine. All right, let's finish up, Scott.
Let's finish the book.
All right. So here we have we finally understand it all. It's the end of the story. I have understood, and the certainty that there is nothing to understand should be my peace, my triumph. But I am here, and they are looking for me, thinking I possess the revelation they sordidly desire. It isn't enough to have understood if others refuse and continue to interrogate. They are still looking for me. They must have picked up my trail in Paris. They know I am here now. They still want the map. And when I tell them that there is no map, they will want it all the more. Belbo was right. Fuck you, fool. You want to kill me? Kill me then, but I won't tell you there's no map. If you can't figure it out for yourself, tough shit. It hurts me to think I won't see Leah again, and the baby, the thing, Giulio, my philosopher's stone. But stones survive on their own. Maybe even now he's experiencing his opportunity. He's found a ball, an ant, a blade of grass, and in it he sees paradise and the abyss. He too will know it too late. He will be good. Never mind. Let him spend his days like this, alone. Damn, it hurts all the same. Patience. When I'm dead, it won't hurt. It's very late. I left Paris this morning. I left too many clues. They've had time to guess where I am. In a little while, they'll be here. I would have liked to write down everything I thought today. But if they were to read it, they would only derive another dark theory and spend another eternity trying to decipher the secret message hidden in my words. It's impossible, they would say. He can't only have been making fun of us. No. Perhaps without his realizing it, being was sending us a message through its oblivion. It makes no difference whether I write or not. They will look for other meanings, even in my silence. That's how they are, blind to revelation. Malchut is Malchut, and that's that. But try telling them, they have little faith. So I might as well stay here, wait, and look at the hill. It's so beautiful.
So he's doing the same thing he's criticizing them of doing, which is like, let's go back a slide, right? Let's go back a couple slide. Of course, you attribute to the others what you're doing yourself, and since what you're doing yourself is hateful, the others become hateful. But since the others, as a rule, would like to do the same thing hateful that you're doing, they collaborate with you, hinting that, yes, what you're attributing to them is actually what they have always desired. That's what he's doing.
So this is the thing, is I don't think that, like, this is I'm totally open to other people's interpretations. My interpretation was that nobody's coming for him. Possibly none of this even happened. Even if it did happen, they don't know he's involved. The idea that he left clues in Paris, like that was just him running around Paris like the narrator at the end of Fight Club. Like nobody was following him. He was totally having a paranoid breakdown.
Yeah. He went into some strange bookstore and asked a guy a question, and the guy got freaked out because he's acting like a weirdo,
Yeah.
and then probably called someone else over to be like, hey, there's this weird guy in my store.
Right. And he just like kept like taking random trips across town to like try to lose tales that weren't there basically.
Mm-hmm.
And and yeah, nobody cares.
This guy looks Arabic, but is he the same Arabic guy that was following? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think you're onto something there. I think it, but in that like, it's also like eventually people will start to come after him as long as he continues to believe there's something to come after, right? Like that's the kind of the cycle of this, isn't it? That like maybe no one is chasing him right now. No one is going to show up at Belbo's old house and be like, ah, there you are. We've been looking for you. But like eventually he will behave and act in a way that lends to people coming after him. This is the reciprocal nature of this whole thing, that like he thinks he's escaped from this concept of being obsessed with secret organizations and the other, but them is all over. They, them, the capital. Right. Like it's just, you've created another secret organization and they're after you. This organization's after you and they're coming for you, and you have to have a plan to escape them.
Yeah, right. It's frustrating that like he really thinks of his child as his philosopher's stone,
mm-hmm.
which is like a perfect metaphor here at the end, where it's like, oh, it's the thing that like makes divinity out of base materials, basically. Mm-hmm. Like it's the thing that brings meaning to the world, right? Mm-hmm. It's magic, and he's like, yeah, but you know he can take care of himself. I'm just gonna sit here in this house and wait for people to come kill me. And you're like, okay, like your eye has been off the ball the whole time. Like maybe, like I guess this could be saying maybe they are gonna come for him because he insists on following the same exact tracks that he knows lead to damnation, that led to Belbo's damnation. He hasn't really learned anything. Mm-hmm. Tringard says they are his excuse for walking out on his child.
Yeah, we haven't talked about his pet nickname for his child is The Thing.
The Thing, yeah.
And granted, I've called my son the Monster before. When he wakes up at 4 a.m, and I roll over and say, the monster is awake. But I'm also not running away from my son and inventing conspiracy theories in my spare time. Or am I? No, I mean, it's interesting because I do think there's this beautiful moment where he understands that Belbo has found peace and understanding in his death. And then I have understood. And the certainty that there is nothing to understand should be my peace, my triumph. But it's not.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not that there's nothing to understand. I think you're misinterpreting that, like, because there's no plan, it means that there's nothing. Of course there's something. There's your son. There's your family. There's everything else in your life.
Yeah.
No, I did not call him Monster on the day of his birth. That is very true.
Right. I mean, I think it's a really good last page because, like, okay, so when he says Malkuth is Malkuth, Malkuth is the Sephiroth of Earth, basically. Mm-hmm. It's like the lowest, most base of the Sephiroth, which he's basically saying like Earth is Earth and that's that. There's no magic here, which is interesting because he just called his son the Philosopher's Stone, where he's like, yeah, like again, I'm repeating myself now because that's kind of how things go toward the end of a book club where you have already traced all the lines through and all you can really do is be like, yeah, like we said, he had a shot at like true meaning and creating life. But he distanced himself from that, and he said, "No. You're the mother. You're the one who created him. I'm going to try to create this transcendent thing that's bigger than me." And then he, fucks it up, and it's going to get him killed now.
Yeah, his conclusion on this whole thing is that there is no plan obviously. There's no conspiracy, but he takes that one further and says there's no magic. There's no greater meaning. There's no greater understanding.
Hmm.
And that's not true. Belbo understood that. He even says he hopes Belbo understands that, but he can't quite get there. It's like all these characters seem so self-aware, but they don't act upon it. Like, go
Yeah.
see your kid and your girlfriend.
Yeah, it's like they're self-aware except for like their own specific thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or they're like mutually aware of each other's blind spots.
Yeah.
Maybe is another thing. Like they genuinely seem to have insight into each other's problems,
Yeah.
um, but not their own so much.
Yep. So he's probably gonna sit on that hill for a while.
Yeah, and maybe they'll come kill him. Maybe nothing will happen. Who knows?
But if they don't come kill him, it's because they're waiting for him to go home. Like, there'll be another thing he can't do. I can't go home because they don't know I'm here, but they'll definitely have tracked me to my home. And hopefully Leah and the baby got out safe, but I won't check because...
Yeah. I mean, if he could just, I feel like if he could just let it all go and just go home, then he'd be fine. But he can't.
Nope. He'll start tracking the history of this group now and seeing
Yep.
where they came from.
Yep. All right. Well,
That's the book, man.
that was that more or less.
Yeah. What a bummer of a ending. Bummed now.
Yeah. Well, just take my interpretation that none of it really happened.
Okay. None of it happened. We're all good here now.
Good. All right.
How are you?
Him. Yeah. Fine.
I don't know. We don't have too many people in the audience because I don't think this was too popular of a book. So I don't know how many questions or comments they are about anything. I enjoyed reading. No, I enjoyed this novel. I did not enjoy reading this novel.
Yeah.
I will not read this novel again.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you compared it to 100 Years of Solitude, and I think that it's an apt comparison. But that book, I said this on that book club, I think. That book, as I was reading it, felt important. Like, I felt like I was reading great literature. And even though it was difficult to read, I powered through it because I felt like I was experiencing something profound and important and historic. This book never felt that way. This book, I was struggling to understand why people love this book so much. And I eventually got to a point where I did understand why this book is so popular and why it's loved. I think, a scholar could go through this book page by page and have something brilliant to say about every single page, every single paragraph if they wanted to. I think it's meticulously constructed. I just don't think it's very fun to read.
Yeah. I mean, each part of 100 Years of Solitude was beautiful in its own particular way, which often had nothing to do with what we usually enjoy in books, which would be like narrative or
Character.
or character. I mean, although I will say 100 Years of Solitude actually had pretty good characters. It was just like confusing because they all had the same names.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the character was more like there were only 5 characters. They're just represented
Yeah.
by like 50 characters.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Whereas in this book, there's like no characters and there's no plot, and it's just sort of this barrage, right? It's just meant to like break you down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, David in the chat says he couldn't finish it. We had a few people actually over the last few days.
They tapped out.
What?
They tapped out. They were just
Yeah,
like, nope, I'm done.
Just yeah, or even say like they started reading and we're just like, is it all like this? And then
Yes.
and then we you were like, yeah, and they're like, see you next month. So I can't say I blame them, although I am glad that I consumed. Here's the thing though, I don't think there's any chance that I'm going to go find an unabridged version and
I
listen
wouldn't.
to that.
I wouldn't tell you to. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a wild thing. Actually, I mean that is why I appreciate book club as a thing, because like there's no way in hell if I had picked this book up at a bookstore that I would have finished it. Like there's just no fucking way I would have finished it. And I'm glad I finished it. I am glad that I finished it. I'm glad to have read it. I would never have done it any other way. And I don't even know if I'm feel confident in saying, no, I recommend you give it a shot. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think Yeah, I don't think I'd recommend it actually. Um, on the whole, it did there's very little of it that was actually of value. Like,
I
which
think
sounds super mean because
I'm
it's sort of a classic, right? But I'm just like, it's a classic in a way. If you're gonna read literature, there's like five other books that we've done that I would recommend that you read before this one. So
sure, sure. If this is if this is the last book available in the world, yeah, go ahead and read it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All
Um,
right, yeah. I
I
mean,
I do kind of think maybe I would give the audiobook, the extremely abridged audiobook, a try.
yeah. I mean, you can give it a try and see how it sits with you, and if you bounce off of it, then fine.
Yeah, especially my boy Tim Curry, who's got one of the most amazing voices ever. So
He does, and then you'll know how to pronounce all these words.
freaking Italians. I can say
Yeah,
that because I'm Italian.
yeah, yeah.
We're allowed to say that.
We're allowed to say that.
Yeah, well, David, I mean, that's interesting. Like he says, I'm very glad I watched Children of Men, but I can't watch it again. But that's like that. I think that's an order of magnitude different though, because Children of Men is like an incredibly well-made, powerful experience that is just traumatic. This was not traumatic; it was just dull,
Uh huh.
and then had moments of brilliance that shined through it. Like I think the experience of having read this book was good despite the book, which is not I think
Yeah.
Vicky, you want to say
It,
about a novel.
it it's interesting because one thing people were saying about the abridged version is they were like, this ruins it. This takes out all of the meandering, rambling, pointless parts, which are like the point of the book. And I'm like, um, maybe.
I don't think that's wrong. I just think that's it's not fun.
Like I think I probably un- understood like 80% of what you did, and I only read like 25% of what you did.
Yeah, yeah,
So, and honestly, part of that could even just be that like honestly, I think that it was fairly unclear when we were switching between like Belbo's files and um protagonist Casaubon's narration.
no, see, the text makes that very clear because it's like indented differently.
Yeah. Well, I think yet again we encountered this problem with the audiobook where you're switching between two things and it's not marked strongly enough, and so I don't realize that there's separate things going on.
Sure, sure.
So that's one possible reason. Because when I said Belbo's files aren't in the book very much, I realized over the course of this conversation that I think certain things that I thought were narration were actually from Belbo's files.
Gotcha,
So
gotcha.
whoopsie.
That's okay. Miss Evil Doom asks, "Do you wish it was different, or do you think the flaws slash unenjoyableness are integral to what it is?" I do think they're integral to what it is. I just wonder, would there have been a better way to get to the same theming that, like, I don't think you can. I really, honestly, don't think you can rip that out of the book and it's the same book. But I just wonder, can we get to the same overall message and what Umberto Eco was trying to do with the overall theme of the story without including that? And I think the answer to that is yeah, I think you can get there. I mean, I think you were the hypothesis that proved that, right? That like you got there theme wise. And that's so funny. That's so
I
funny
feel like I did.
because yeah, like when we first realized that you got the abridged version, the first thing I did was open up my Audible app and go read the reviews because I was curious. And yeah, people are like bagging it, and like after this conversation, I wish I had just done that because I think we would have been on the same page. But yeah, I mean, that's where I'm really torn about this because I do think feeling overwhelmed and bogged down by the sheer amount of meandering history is indeed what Umberto Eco was going for.
Hmm.
Like, I get it. Like, I totally get it. I
Hmm.
just didn't like it.
I don't know if this is a good idea, but I wonder if you could do like a copy of the book that's basically like the abridged version except full of like little footnotes that then refer to like so like I'm holding up my fingers for the camera, which is not helpful for anyone. But like you have like an inch, which is like the book, and then you have like 4 inches, which is all the footnotes, which is all the stuff that was cut out from the book and then
Right.
moved to the end. And then at least you don't actually have to look at it, but it gives you a tactile sense of how much bullshit these characters were like wading through.
Yeah. Like, what do you
Um,
actually need to know about the Knights Templar to understand the narrative, the themes, or the characters of this book? Nothing. Nothing. There's not a...
it's true. You're right. It's all totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Well,
And it's I mean, that the Templar are just an example. The Rosicrucians, the Masons, the assassins, like, you don't actually need to understand the history of these groups to understand what the book is doing with the linking them together. And I think, if I might say, the Da Vinci Code proved that, because it just used the names and made all the rest of the shit up, and then it's fine. Not that that's a good book, it's not, but like it just used the plot form of that thing.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Trinkart says, the crazy thing to me is that Matt and I gave our first review calling it dense and rambling before revealing we read an abridged copy. Yeah, like, that's, your abridged copy is still probably pretty dense and rambly, because like, you can't even cut all that out if it's 99% of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it definitely has the stuff you're talking about. Just, I guess not nearly as much of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Ms. Evil Doom says it reminds them of House of Leaves, where there are constant footnotes referencing non-existent text. Yeah, but see, the thing about House of Leaves is it's clever because, like, the book is telling one story and then the footnotes telling another story, and it's just so fucking good. And some of it's rambly, but not the whole story. Oh God, Matt, have you read House of Leaves?
No, not yet. I really want to though.
The thing about House of Leaves is
Putting on my list.
you're gonna have to read it.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an audiobook for House of Leaves. I don't understand how it would work if there was one.
I think I might just order it like right now on the podcast
It's such a good book.
while
Man.
I have my phone open so
You're
I
gonna
don't
make
forget.
me go read it again because I read that book. I think I've read it 3 times. I love that book. Let me look on Audible though. House of Leaves.
Is there a particular version?
There is no audiobook, thank goodness. There's a full color version. Let me hold on. Let me look. Let me look before you order this, because I think there's
Okay.
like a 10th anniversary version or something that's like full color.
Just gonna add to cart but not purchase yet because we're
This is great fucking audio. That's all I
probably
know. That's all I know.
Don't worry, everyone. I'm going to buy House of Leaves. Okay, I know that's why you're here.
All right. I would love to cover that on book club too, but I think it's just too long. It's a pretty big book.
Okay.
Speaking of big books, let's talk about what we're doing next month, Matt.
Let's do it.
So here's what happened. We put forth 5 books that we hoped would be light, quick, and fun reads. So we wanted the opposite of what we had this month. And it was a very, very close vote. As we can see here, here are the results. So it's a tie. We have a tie between The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers and Words of Radiance by our favorite prologist, Brandon Sanderson. It's a tie.
Great. A tie. 31 votes for each.
Yep. In the past, we have, in the event of a tie, just said, okay, well, our audience couldn't make up their mind. We're going to pick. So we're going to do that again. Honestly, what's going to happen is next month we're going to do one. The month after that, we'll do the other. Like, that's realistically, we might throw up a vote after that, but like, I think that the one that's tied is just going to win the vote. Like, that's just what's going to happen. So, this next month we are going to do The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. We're going to do the Becky Chambers book first. We'll do Sanderson next, because the other thing about the Sanderson novel Matt, it's real big, so we're gonna have to do our thing where we cut it in half again. And I didn't want to have to make that decision right now about where to cut it in half because it's gonna be challenging because it doesn't cut in half nicely. Like there's not like end of part 3 is right in the middle of the book. It just doesn't work that way. So next month we're going to be reading The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I have heard extremely good things about this book, so I'm very excited to check it out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard good recommendations for this book from people who I don't normally think of as reading a lot, which I always see as a good sign that it's like, oh, okay, people just love this book, actually. So, all right.
David says they voted for every single one except for the Sanderson book. Well, you are the hero of the hour, David, because oh no, I just made everything go away. How did I do that? There we go.
I don't know, man.
Because it's because of you. Because of you, we did it. We did it. This is the first time Sanderson has not outright won a poll since we've been doing the book club.
So everyone thank David.
Yeah. And Tringard just completely counters David by voting for everyone except for the Becky Chambers novel. Well, that's okay, Tringard. I hope you give it a shot. Or if you don't want to, I hope we see you in a couple months.
Yeah.
If Words of Radiance is next month and Sekiro wins the August Game Club vote, then both clubs will be doing 2-month projects at the same time. That would be wild. That would be wild. I think the way they do 2-month projects is a little different than ours, though. Because honestly, like the reason we carve up the 1,100 word books is not because Matt and I won't be able to finish the book in that amount of time. Like I have no problem finishing that book in that amount of time, but I feel like it's just too much to talk about in one show. And we would either have to just like fast forward through the entire book. I just don't think it'd be as good of a show. So that's why we carve it up. I think they carve it up because they're playing games that take like 50 hours to beat, which is just that's a lot of gameplay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's pros and cons to splitting the book because then like the thematic through line is split across 2 books. You don't necessarily know how it's going to end, but
yeah, I do. I mean, we might change our mind about this. The other part of the reason why I elected us to go to break the tie with Becky Chambers' novel is because I'm still kind of wondering if there's a better way to approach that, because I do think that with the first novel, our part 1 was just not as good as the part 2, our conversation, because it's like, well, I don't like this, but it might get better, and I can kind of see what I don't know. So
well, yeah, I think it's a problem that I personally have with Sanderson, where I don't really like his characters until later in the story, where like they have had some time to grow on me and deepen and show kind of their complexity. And so in the first half of a book, there's a risk that I'm just going to be like, I don't like any of these characters, I don't care about them. And then by the end, I always do.
But as this is book 2 in a series, shouldn't you already love the characters?
That is a fair point, maybe.
Here's a further point, though. I don't remember anything that happened in the first book.
Yep.
I remember there was a bunch of plateaus where they had to put bridges across them.
There were crab monsters.
And there were crab monsters. And there was magic armor. And Kaladin?
There was Stormlight. And there was some kind of archive.
And Kelethin, the slave, saved the day.
Yep. And he had a Shash brand on his forehead, which is unrelated from the Shash brand in the other Brandon Sanderson book.
And he had a magical fairy that was special that talked to him.
That's true, Shingar. We can just listen to our old podcast.
Thank God I can just listen to myself, my past self, talk about this book that
What did I think about this? Oh yeah.
I honestly, like, I'm being a little facetious, but like I really remember very little of that book.
Yeah.
I remember he was lashed to a tent and he survived the storm, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, he survived the storm!" And then he saved the king dude. He's not a king; he's like a general. I don't know.
But now we're spoiling the book for everyone who is just here to listen to our discussion of.
I don't think they care.
FOUCAULT'S Pendulum.
I feel like I don't know.
All three of them.
don't we wrap this bad boy up?
I guess we
do that.
could.
All right. Thank you so much for the handful of you that showed up for this not very popular novel that somehow won the vote last month. It was fun talking with y'all. Thank you for participating, Tringard. I think the only one of the three people here that finished the novel.
Yeah. Thanks for your input, Tringard. It was valuable having one person in the whole world who's read this book. Well, anyway, if you like what we do here at Doof Media and you want to see more of it, maybe with more popular books, then head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia and consider donating to support our organization. At any available level, you will get access to vote for the books we talk about each month. So maybe you could vote for a better one, as well as a bunch of other exclusive features. So go check that out.
Yeah, just think if you were a patron, you could have successfully made Brandon Sanderson win.
Yeah.
All right, folks, if you have any questions or comments or just want to reach out to us about this month's book, next month's book, or any of the 46 books we have done since we began the book club, you can reach us on Twitter at doofmedia, or email doofmedia@gmail.com, or you can always chat with us on our Reddit. That is r/doofmedia. That's it for us. We're done. Don't read Foucault's Pendulum. Read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and we'll see you next month. I was a little worried that either, someone within our community already or someone that was just like trolling the internet for Foucault's Pendulum discourse was going to hop into chat and just lambast us for 2 hours for not being as into the novel as a lot of people seem to be. So I'm kind of very glad that did not happen.
Yeah. I think we were pretty balanced actually in terms of being like, look, like I'm glad that I read it. I'm happy that I have read it now, but I'm not gonna read it again. And
no, I mean, I barely read books more than once to begin with, let alone.
Yeah, I mean, at the time while I was listening to it, there were times where I was just like, I'd rather be listening to anything else.
Matt Tringard has a question for you.
Tringard, where there's some sections or Curry whispered that you just couldn't hear. Yeah, I think so, but I think I didn't care. Yeah, I think that happened.
I didn't realize. I guess I put a watermark on the stream, and it's now like floating right next to your head. Do you see the Doof watermark next to your head?
I do.
I don't remember doing that, but I guess I did it. Oh, we forgot to say there's a game club tomorrow. We should have said that on the... Well,
there is.
I guess it doesn't matter for the recording because that'll already be over by the time that comes out. So people in chat, go to game club tomorrow.
Yeah, game club tomorrow night. Same time, same Doof place, same Doof channel.
It's clever. Thank you. I have to do... hey, recording Kingslingers. Sunday is the 4th of July. Do you want to record on the 4th of July?
I'm indifferent.
I kind of don't want to.
Okay.
Want to do Monday?
Sure.
Okay. So that means I don't have to work on the prep tonight. So
that is true. You don't have to work on the prep tonight.
Because I was kind of busy doing prep for the book club, and I haven't even started.
Yeah, I agree.
I read it. I just haven't done any of the prep work.
This is a good idea.
I agree. Folks, we're going to go to bed.
Good night.
Actually, I think I might play Doom 2016. Wait, what time is
Awesome.
it? No, I'm going to go to bed. It's 12 o'clock. Jesus Christ. All right, folks. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next month, I hope. And hope to see you in the chat for Game Club tomorrow, because I'm going to somehow find a way to finish that entire game before 9:30 tomorrow night. It's not going to happen, but good night. We'll see you next month.
Bye-bye.